to our national debt?
Right now, the U.S. is a car driving into a wall with our foot all the way down on the gas. We are proposing, the federal administration is proposing a $7 trillion budget next year. We have $33 trillion of national debt. That number has swelled since COVID and in the years following due to the launch of new programs and other stimulatory effects, spending by the federal government. And the problem with having too high of a national debt relative to national GDP is the way that a government pays their debt is by taxing their economy, taxing their GDP. And there's a natural limit to how much economically you can actually tax the economy. Once you increase taxes too high, investment declines. Once you tax investments too high on individuals, people leave. We saw this with the launch of the wealth tax in France. There's an attrition of capital, a hiding of capital. All of these factors aren't necessarily about people being bad and doing bad things. They're just natural economic forces that we've seen play out many times in the past. So there's a certain natural limit to how much debt government can actually take on.
Do we have a sense of what that limit is?
Well, some people would argue it's somewhere between 100 and 150 to, maybe up to 200% of GDP, but 100 and 150% is really where things are sustainable. Now, the U.S. is a very unique outlier in, the history of global economies. But there has been, and I talked about this on our podcast years ago, a set of studies, and Ray Dalio kind of captured a bunch of data together in his book about the changing world order and the economic cycles that we've seen historically. 6 times in the last 500 years, we've seen these sorts of things. Have you had Ray on your show?
Yeah, a couple times.
So you know the story. So I think that's the thing that makes me worried is at some point spending at the federal level gets so high and debt levels get so high that it's really hard to come back from that money printing that's needed to support paying that interest and paying that debt. And right now, inflation is being fueled by the stimulatory effects of these programs. And because things are inflating, the government feels like there is a need to help make things easier for people. So they put more money and launch more programs to try and reduce inflation. And in doing so, they increase inflation. And then as inflation goes up, the interest rates on the debt have to go up. When the interest rates on the debt go up, it becomes harder to pay down the debt. And so our $33 trillion of debt, a good 50% of it is getting refinanced now, where the interest rate moves from an average of about 3% to 5%. And when that happens, 2% increase in interest on $15 trillion, that's another $300 billion of interest payments a year. And this year, we're already paying $1 trillion just in interest on the debt that the federal government owes to its bondholders, to the people that own treasuries. So we're getting to a point that it becomes really difficult to actually stop the spending, pay the interest, and or reduce the debt levels. And that's how these spirals kind of have played out historically. And every time it's played out, whether it was the Dutch or the English or, whomever you want to kind of look to, there was always this, it can't happen here. This is the leading global economy. This is the reserve currency of the world. It's not going to happen here. And every time the natural forces of arithmetic played out. And that's why I'm so worried. I think that the U.S. needs to, the U.S. voting population needs to be really thoughtful about voting for one's individual self-interest and voting for the safety of the Union, of the United States over the long run. Can we create a circumstance in this country where people recognize that we need to reduce spending and that people are going to lose benefits? They're going to lose things that they've otherwise had for some period of time. And that is a nearly impossible thing to make happen in a democracy where individuals get to vote. And that's where we see these sorts of things start to unravel. So that's why I'm so worried. And that's why I am a single issue voter. I want someone to show leadership. Like Bill Clinton had those poster boards back in the day where he said, here's how we balance the budget. Here's how we cut things back down to break even. I think we need a degree of simplicity and leadership around that being the key point and the key objective of the next administration. And unfortunately, I don't think we see either, candidates standing up and saying we're going to do that.
If we get either Trump or Biden, both of them increase the debt massively. So we certainly have 4 years on both counts of what they'll do economically. I want to know though, why can't we stop spending?
The thing about humans is I think we are fundamentally driven by this concept that I think is best phrased as desire. It doesn't go away. Humans never stop wanting. The natural condition of a human is to see something that we don't have and then create a objective of I want to have that thing I don't have. When I then have that thing, I no longer feel like I'm unmotivated. I now look for and I naturally see the next thing. I think this is what made humans evolutionarily successful. We were able to then scout out the next meal, scout out the bigger building, scout out the better cave, and it allowed us as a species to continuously progress, expand our population, and succeed and thrive on this planet. But the unfortunate reality is that tuning, that biological tuning, has this effect where no one is ever actually satisfied, fully satisfied with the things they have. Satisfaction comes from the change in the things that you have, the delta. And the delta from year to year is what drives happiness. And in a voting system, in a political system, it drives how people vote. That if my income isn't going up by 10% per year, I am unsatisfied. And there's a lot of good behavioral and social studies on this. There was a study done years ago, which I think has been disproven since, but it does a good job, I think, of explaining this, which is up to a certain limit of income, people are unhappy and they get happier with more and more income. After that limit of income, where all of your basic needs are met with respect to being able to pay for your food, your housing, medical, and take care of your family, your income is no longer your predictor of happiness. Your change in income is your predictor of happiness. So if we start with that premise of like human behavior, the government now has an incredible, the federal government in the United States has an incredible role in supporting a lot of people through active programs that pump money into businesses. So the government is a customer of many businesses, or employing many people that end up working directly for the government or under government programs. And I think a study, I tried to pull together all this data a couple months ago, but something north of like 30 or 40% of the US working force is touched by the government as a customer of their business, the primary customer of their business, or as the employer of those individuals. So the government has created, has been a big driving force for economic growth in the United States over the last 250 years. But we're now reaching a point where in order to sustain that system, where people have their income and their livelihoods improved year after year because of government intervention and government policy, it's no longer kind of sustainable. So let's talk about some of the big government programs. A lot of people in the United States are dependent on Social Security and the income that comes from Social Security. That program on its own is forecast to go bankrupt in 2033, wow, independent of a lot of the issues we're dealing with in the debt and spending and the rest of the government. The Medicare program, the costs continue to climb, continue to mount, and a lot of people are dependent on that program for their healthcare needs. So those are two very large programs, federal programs, a very large percentage of federal spending. How do you get voters where there are tens of millions of people that are dependent on those programs to vote to reduce those benefits? They simply won't. And it's why neither Democrats nor Republicans, and I'm not advocating for it at all. I'm not advocating for reducing those programs. I'm just pointing out the simple reality of how a democracy will work in this circumstance, which is those individuals don't want to give up those benefits. They don't want to give up that income. They don't want to give up that medical care. It was promised to them. They invested in those programs for decades. But the government and the way that the system has been set up has now made it very difficult because we have to take on more debt to support those programs. And then we have a lot of other stimulatory programs, a lot of other systems where the government is the customer of businesses. They are spending money to buy stuff from those businesses. Medicare is a good example. They buy a lot of pharmaceutical drugs. And the system is challenged because if I'm the government, what's my incentive to negotiate for a lower price? I can go to Congress and get a bigger budget next year. Everyone in the system is built to make more money for themselves. So next year, I want to have a bigger budget. I want to be able to spend more. I want to grow my organization. No one ever leads an organization and says, I want to shrink this organization. I want to cut it by 50%. That's my goal. Let's shrink the organization that I'm leading. The natural incentive is to grow. So I think that there's a lot of like tension in the way that the system has evolved, that both the internal organizations are designed to grow and the voters are not going to give stuff up that they've gotten. And I always think about, like, in my junior high, there was a kid who ran for like president, and he said, I'm going to make all the vending machines free. That was his platform. It was so smart. And everyone voted for him. Like, of course, I'm going to vote for the guy that tells me I'm going to get the vending machines are going to be free. I don't have to pay for my chips and soda anymore. That's how people get elected in a democracy. They go to the voters and they say, here's what I'm going to give you. They don't say, here's what I'm going to cut back for the survival of the union over the next 50. That doesn't sell. What sells is, I'm going to increase Medicare benefits. I'm going to improve Social Security. I'm going to launch new programs to support, your community. I'm going to build stuff. I'm going to create new jobs. Those are the things that voters want to hear. And so there's this demand from the voters for more stuff. So I would argue that the politicians aren't necessarily even the cause of the problem. I think that they're more a symptom of the system that is set up to operate this way. That it not necessarily set up to operate this way, but naturally evolves to this point that the voters every year want more stuff. And if they're not getting more stuff because the economy isn't naturally growing and their incomes aren't growing, they turn and look to the government to solve those problems, and then the government has to grow. And then they put people in place who stand up and say, I'll give you all that stuff. And they're like, okay, great. You're the guy. You're the gal. You go do that. We vote for you. And I think that's why it's so hard to back away from this.
Right. Explain to people how money printing fits into this and why. So money printing was something that I had to discover quite late in life and realize there's some pretty, the fundamental nature of how it works was not at all what I thought. So what is money printing? How does it play in?
I want to make sure my numbers are right, and I could be wrong on this.
We can double check.
Normally I'm on a computer when I do this sort of thing, so I can
just tell Drew what you wanted to look up.
But if you look at the balance sheet of the Fed and the balance sheet, the balance of the treasuries that they hold, I think it's about $8 trillion now. So the central bank of the United States is the Federal Reserve, 7.4 trillion. So about $8 trillion. The federal government needs money to pay its bills, all the stuff that it's spending money on. And the way that the federal government does that is they tax businesses and citizens, and that tax allows them to pay their bills, but we spend more than we make. So the federal government has to issue bonds. These are promises to pay in the future. And those bonds are bought by people like you and I. It's bought by foreign governments, China, Saudis. A lot of individuals and companies around the world like to hold U.S. Treasury bonds. Right now, Treasury bonds are a great yield. You can get 5% interest by buying U.S. Treasuries, and the federal government guarantees they're going to give it to you. That's the word of the U.S. federal, the U.S. Treasury, which has historically been considered a risk-free asset. And then they take those treasuries and they get cash, and then they take that cash and they pay their bills. One of the buyers of treasuries is the central bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, which is overseen by Congress, but is separate, doesn't actually report up to the president. So the Federal Reserve has this ability to buy treasuries and issue money, issue cash that they don't have, right? So the Federal Reserve has this ability to print the US dollar. And so historically, they've been buyers of treasuries, supporting the market for the federal government to be able to issue debt to pay their bills. And then as more money comes into the system from the Federal Reserve, which is effectively created out of nothing, that money flows its way into the economy. And if you have, for example, 30 trillion US dollars floating around versus 10 trillion US dollars floating around, things are going to inflate because there's more dollars to spend on stuff and the cost of things will naturally go up. That's a super, super duper simplified way of kind of explaining the system. So the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, issues money almost on a loan basis to banks and buys treasuries with the expectation that at some point the US government's going to pay them back. So that's the economic relationship between the central bank and the federal government. And the way that money then finds its way into the system, the federal government can't just print the money, the central bank can, and then those treasuries get held by our central bank, and that money finds its way into the system. So at some point, whether you can look at the total amount of debt of the federal government and think like any household, how much debt can you afford each month, and at what point are you going to go broke? That's one way to look at it. And another way to look at it is that in order to overcome that, there's going to be a lot of money printing because the Federal Reserve can just buy all those bonds and issue that money. And then that money just finds its way into the system. So there's a question at which point there's too many dollars that get printed.
This is the part that people don't understand.
Yeah.
So there's a magic thing that happens when the money is made up. You said, I think, essentially made up out of thin air. I'll say it's made up out of thin air, like completely fake, untethered to anything. It is literally just entry into a database that they decide to click clack, and now that money technically exists. Why isn't that awesome? Why isn't it awesome that we can just make more money, just keep making more money, make the budget bigger every year,
So let's say that you and I have $50 each, and we're the only people with money. And there's a guy over here selling sodas. We know we can buy those sodas now, and he's only got 4 sodas to sell. And we really want to buy all the sodas, so we eventually end up paying $25 each for a soda. Okay, there's 4 sodas, $50 each. Suddenly, some guy shows up with another $100. Or let's say the other guy shows up with $200. Now he's going to start competing for those sodas. And the guy that's selling those 4 sodas is like, hey guys, it's no longer, $50 a soda. What did I say? $50, $25 a soda.
Yeah.
Suddenly the price is $75 a soda because there's more people that want sodas and there's more cash available. So that's how the price of sodas inflated. That's what happens when there's more money that floods into the system, is that the purchasing power of the existing dollars in the system goes down because there's now more money competing for some number of assets or services that are being sold. So the price of assets and the price of services goes up, and the value of the dollars goes down, which means that the value of your savings, the value of the stuff you own goes down. And this is particularly true for the majority of Americans who are not big asset holders, right? They only have, more than half of Americans, can't pull together $1,000 for an emergency. So if the value of dollars go down and their incomes aren't going up, they're deeply hurt by that. People that own a lot of stuff can take their assets and they can buy inflation hedged securities or inflation hedged assets. Like you could go buy timberland, you could buy gold, or you could buy Bitcoin, which a lot of people argue is a great inflation hedge now. And those assets, because they're fixed in supply, they will go up in dollar denominated terms. And so wealthy people can handle inflation. The majority of other people cannot. And inflation really hurts the economic growth because now people spend less, they have less money to spend, and businesses shrink and things go bankrupt. So inflationary cycles are very damaging to economic cycles.
Okay, so we have a thing that happens where we're in an inflationary cycle. It's brutalizing people, but I would say the average person doesn't understand it, so they don't know that it's happening. I'll make a statement. You tell me if you think this is fair. Money printing is legalized theft from the government. They are stealing not your dollars, because you're going to have the same amount of dollars in the bank, but they are knowingly stealing your purchasing power, which is the same in effect as just taking money from you.
Yes. And what I will change about your statement is I will expand the definition of government to the people that were voted into government by the people that voted. Okay. And this is what's so important to understand is we all kind of separate out these elitists and these politicians that are doing bad stuff to us. But the voters in the United States have the ability to change that. They have the ability to see this problem and make a decision about who might be a better candidate to solve this problem for us, instead of being myopic to getting more stuff for themselves individually in the near term, which is an impossible ask, but one that's worth noting. There's a reason that there's a reason that the voters have made that choice. It's not just that there is a bad person who is choosing to print a lot of money and steal our money. I am very, very much about rethinking the concept of the role of government in our lives and in our economy. That's prime to me, because I do think that anytime the government gets involved in markets, it distorts the market forces that allow things to get better and make things cheaper for people and make markets grow. Everything goes wrong when governments get involved in markets. There's no scenario I can think of where things are good. But individuals will still rationalize it. The guy who owns the defense contractor is very happy with the government, being involved in markets, because he gets to make a bunch of money selling the government turbines from his business. And because the government is a cost plus model on defense contracting, the more he charges, the more money he makes. So he's incentivized to charge more every year. So that model needs to change, right? As an example of the things that can be affected by the voters. I agree with your point. I just think that the voters have a role in this, in a democracy, in addressing the problem.
Okay.
And sorry, I'll say one more thing, which is worth noting. Go back to the example of the soda guy. The guy only has 4 sodas. But what if he comes up with some newfangled technology, a replicator machine, like from Star Trek, and now he can make 8 sodas or 12 sodas or 20 sodas? His invention of that technology makes the cost of soda less, even as there's more money coming in. There's now more sodas, so we don't need to all compete for fewer sodas. So the productivity, the production of more stuff is good for the economy, and it gets us out of this problem. So when you hear people talk about economic growth or GDP growth, there are 2 things that drive GDP growth. One is the inflation of stuff, things going up because there's more money coming in. But the other one is improved productivity, technology, making more stuff with less resources. And that has historically made the United States so successful, and for the last 250 years has fueled our economy, fueled the United States' success globally, our innovation, our entrepreneurship. Technology solves this problem if we can get it to move quickly, fast enough. There's another point besides just voting right and fixing this through the voting system, which is enabling more technological innovation and enabling productivity gains to arise from technology. In that sense, we face another critical problem right now, which is a very serious negative view on technology. And I do think that the majority of people don't necessarily think about, if you say the word technology, there's a more negative association with that word than positive. Go back to the 1950s. There were all of these crazy like posters about humans will go on rockets to the moon, and we're all going to live on star bases on the moon. We're all going to be on monorails and move around the country. And monorails are going to be flying cars. These new materials that we were inventing were going to change everything. We'll be able to put on suits and go underwater and go to our underwater cities. There was this incredible wave of innovation that happened, particularly out of the chemical engineering revolution that happened in the early 20th century and the early industrial revolution and then post-World War II, where we were so optimistic about technology. Then what happened is that we started to get cancer, and there were meltdowns of nuclear facilities, and there was a Cold War. So there were these big nuclear bombs sitting over our heads all the time, and we were doing duck and cover from nuclear bomb attack training at school. And I think that the American psyche and the psyche of the West largely, which benefited very much from this progress that arose from technology, got really challenged in terms of adopting and appreciating the upside of technology because there was so much downside. And then we got scared of technology, and then everything became kind of this critical anti-technology association. In 1955, Disneyland opened, I've told this story before, with this ride called Tomorrowland, or this area called Tomorrowland. I mean, you've been there. And every ride there was about the future opportunity with technology. You'd go on a rocket ship to the moon and back. That was one of the rides. You would go inside the world of chemicals, and you would learn about making plastics and making new materials. And it was like, this is going to, and it was like the home of the future. And they showed this really cool home where everything was like made of these new materials. And it was crazy because prior to that, we were like hand making wood, everything. In the 1970s, they started to turn over all the rides in Tomorrowland at Disneyland, and every ride got remade as a fear of technology ride. So the rocket ship to the moon became Space Mountain, and it's all about a rocket ship that went off course, and it went flying through and so you're on this crazy, scary ride. Star Tours was a robot that broke down and the navigator robot broke down, and you went on a wrong course, and you nearly crash and die. Captain EO, I don't know if you remember this, Captain EO, Michael Jackson comes from outer space with his clan of people, and they destroy the robotic world that had been overtaken by robots, and they return it to an organic, natural state. So everything about what appealed to people starting in the 70s, as represented out of Disneyland and Tomorrowland, was all about technology goes awry, and we have to return everything to a natural, organic state. So there's this great tension, and we see it play out all the time in bioengineering, in gene editing, in AI, in all of these advanced technologies that the United States is leading in and progressing in. But there is so much trepidation and concern and fear that we are potentially missing out on the productivity gains and the boon that would arise from these technologies being more rapidly adopted and solving this big kind of economic crunch that we're running into. So I just wanted to highlight that important point, because I think it's really critical for folks to pay attention to. And I'm not saying that the concerns and the risks of nuclear meltdowns and cancer and chemicals, all this stuff is unfounded. But what we have a tendency to do is to take one event or one experience and blanket the entire space or the entire industry around that one experience and say, we need to stop all of this because we have no margin for loss. There was a guy who died in 1997, 99. I'm going to get this wrong. A patient who was getting a gene therapy treatment. It was a young guy. And when he died, they put a stop on gene therapy treatments for, I think, 7 years. They weren't allowed to do any more gene therapy treatments. And since then, we now have literally dozens of gene therapy treatments that can cure dozens of human diseases, saving millions of lives. But for 7 years, we weren't allowed to make those things progress because we were worried about losing another life.
Right.
And so there's a challenging thing in a wealthy nation like ours. And I've gone on for a while, but we worry more about loss than we care about gain. If you go to a small, poor African nation, they are not worried about the downside of putting in a nuclear power plant that would drop the cost of electricity and give everyone abundant power in their homes and clean water. They would say, we'll take that now. Done. Lock it in. But the United States, we don't want to have a nuclear reactor because now the marginal cost of electricity gets reduced by 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So it goes from 15 cents to 12 cents. I'd rather not have a nuclear facility in my backyard. We have the privilege of that in this wealthy nation. So that's the other tension that holds us back from embracing new technologies is our risk aversion. We are more worried about loss than we care about gain in the state of where we are.
Inflation is eating the value of the dollar alive, and that's why it is more important than ever to look for ways to cut costs while also boosting performance in your business. And one solution that's helped over 37,000 companies do just that is Netsuite by Oracle. Netsuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one platform and one source of truth. It reduces IT costs and cuts the cost of maintaining multiple systems. You improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors, and giving you an edge over your competitors. Backed by popular demand, Netsuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. So head over to netsuite.com/theory right now. Again, that's netsuite.com/theory. netsuite.com/theory. If you want to reach your full potential this year, you have got to focus on providing yourself with the best possible building blocks for your brain and body. And that is why I recommend ButcherBox. You guys know ButcherBox is a huge part of my life because they go above and beyond to source only high quality and humanely raised meats and seafood. This includes 100% grass-fed beef, free-range organic chicken, humanely raised pork, and wild-caught seafood, all shipped for free and delivered directly to your door. This year, get exactly what you need to hit your healthy eating goals. ButcherBox is offering our listeners their choice of meat, bone-in chicken thighs, hop sirloins, or salmon for free in every order for a whole year. Plus, get $20 off your first order. Sign up today for this incredible offer at butcherbox.com/impact and use code IMPACT to choose your free offer and get $20 off. You're putting a lot of psychological principles on the table, which are great, but I want to give people some mile markers.
Sorry, I've gone over a lot of stuff.
No, this is fantastic. So this is a lot of the stuff that I wanted to lay out, but I think we need to drill in a few places. So one, going back to money printing, because this is the one that I think everything revolves around this. And we haven't even talked yet about how war plays into this.
Yeah.
But so money printing, I think a big part of the problem is that people do not understand it. So you can say it, but they don't understand it. And it's a very counterintuitive thing to say, dear constituent, I'm going to print some money and I'm going to give that money to you. And it's very difficult for people to understand that's bad for you. And it may help in like a really acute moment, like when COVID happens and you need to put stimulus into people's hands just to calm some of the panic and make sure everybody makes it through okay. But even that is a trade-off, and you're going to have a problem. And I'll say what the problem is very succinctly. The way that money gets put into the system in that magical moment where the Fed creates money out of thin air is that they're buying the bonds with it. So now if I hold that asset class, I'm going to get that money. And so that money basically just protected me. So their mechanism for getting the new money into the marketplace was to buy the asset that I had to give me my guaranteed return on that money.
Yes.
Now, that I'm already going to have to be educated to be doing that. So most people aren't doing that. So this starts to create this divide between the haves and the have-nots. So then people, what they don't understand in that moment is that when they print the money, they are socializing that decline in buying power across everybody.
That's right.
Poor, wealthy, everybody. But the wealthy just got a bump because they got the money that they put into the bond or the treasury protected, plus they got a return on that money.
Right.
And they only lose as much as the person who gained nothing from the money printing, but now only loses. And so as they just print, if you're like, oh, I'm getting my Social Security protected, oh, I'm getting this funded or whatever, they think, oh, this is amazing, but they don't realize that those losses are being socialized across everybody. And then the other one, and this is something that I've heard you say really succinctly, is that it also creates an appetite for war. Explain why that's true. Why does money printing lead to more wars?
Yeah. It's not simple, but we've seen it historically over and over and over again, which is as great nations rise, their populations demand more. The government takes on debt, prints more money, gives the population more, and at some point you reach this critical natural state where the economic condition isn't naturally growing. It's not catching up to the cost of the debt to support the programs and the things that the population demanded, that the people demanded. So at any given moment, there is the potential for war. Okay. At any given moment, there is someone out there talking smack about the United States. There is someone somewhere out there instigating, launching stuff at a base. There's always some instigation. The choice of, do we make a decision now to let Saddam Hussein continue to be the leader of Iraq, or do we make the choice to go in and spend $1 trillion to remove him from his position and go get access to those oil fields and then put US companies in charge of those oil fields and then tax those companies to generate revenue, becomes a more interesting choice, a more obvious choice. And I'm not saying that there's a conspiracy theory and why we went to, I think America wanted to do something bad coming out of 9/11. We wanted to do something not bad. We wanted to do something aggressive to respond to 9/11.
Well, we've got contemporary examples with Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine. Like there's unfortunately, no shortage of things where this is.
So what are we going to do with Yemeni Houthis launching stuff at cargo ships going through the Suez? Do we choose to have a proportional response, meaning send in some SEAL teams and take care of that? Or do we move all of our military to that region and start to instigate and support the Israeli conflict in Gaza and then start to fuel Iran's interest in getting involved and eventually force an alliance between Russia and Iran and China, which creates a really nasty circumstance, but allows us to then move our military machinery and our economic forces into that circumstance? Because war historically has driven a lot of shifts in economic productivity. It has driven a lot of growth in aspects of the economy that need to be stimulated. And so it's not like there's a bunch of guys sitting around in a dark room, Illuminati guys saying, let's go to war and grow the economy. But when things are great, when the government is running a surplus, when people are happy, when voters are happy, when the nation is not divided, the economy is growing and everyone is employed and everyone feels good, and Israel gets into it and Gaza gets into it and the Palestinians and the Israelis get into it, the U.S. in that circumstance is probably more inclined to say, you know what, let's not escalate this thing right now. Things are pretty good at home. Can you guys just resolve your differences? Same with Russia, Ukraine. Can you guys please just not escalate? We're not going to give you a lot of weapons, Ukraine. Go negotiate a settlement. Go figure out how to resolve this thing. We rationalize it now as in pursuit of liberty, in pursuit of democracy. There's always a way for either side to rationalize the decision. But I'm just saying, generally speaking, if people are happy at home, they're not looking for conflict abroad. We are not happy at home. And the economic circumstances are deeply coupled with our unhappiness at home. And so we are more willing to engage in conflict abroad. Let's give another 80 billion to Ukraine. Let's get that thing going. Let's do something as a nation. I think there's a lot of aspects to why this happens. One is it brings people together. We now have a common enemy. There's an external force, this bad guy in Russia, Putin. We got to go get him. Let's all get behind this idea of destroying Putin. It's great. Okay, good. He's the bad guy. Saddam Hussein, he's the bad guy. Is it Hamas or Israel? We're really not sure right now. So like there's got to be a bad guy over there.
There is a bad guy somewhere.
There's a bad guy. Let's go get him. And then we get to spend a bunch of money. It's stimulatory. I mean, you heard what's his name? Our Senate majority leader. Our Senate leader. Anyway, he said all the money's coming back home. We're spending all this money on Ukraine, but we're actually we're giving them money to buy weapons from US manufacturers. So that money's coming back home. It's stimulatory.
Right.
It creates economic growth. It creates revenue. And now the debt is owed back by Ukraine. So we're just taking another balance sheet item, right? We're taking a balance sheet item from the Ukrainians. They now own some treasuries. They're now owing money back to the government. We've given them that resource. So I think there's a bunch of reasons. I think that there's this psychological uncertainty that drives this. Things are not good at home. Well, I can feel in control if I go beat someone up, right? It's like a bully. I can go feel better about resolving my issues at home if I can go fix a country elsewhere and get new businesses installed there and make money there. That could be good. That sounds like a better thing to do, because these problems at home are pretty insurmountable. They're pretty hard to deal with. So I think that's why we've seen this. I don't know if anyone's written a good set of papers on this to go through each of the historical periods where we've seen external conflict arise out of increased money printing and debt, but it always happens. It always happens. And I just got really nervous, coming out of 2022 or 21. And I was like, man, I think we're going to end up in a war with Russia. Like, it just felt like the circumstances were right, given the deficit we were running that year and how debt was running up that year. Little did I know that we keep doing it for 2 more years like we've been doing, and it's only getting worse. $7 trillion budget proposal next year. So I just felt like coming out of 21, we were going to end up in this conflict with Putin, because he was sort of making comments about, hey, I need a commitment of not joining NATO, and I need more of this. And there was all this stuff that had been going on for a decade. But suddenly, it seemed to be the right mix of stuff for us to say, let's get involved, let's do something. No one will admit that. And I don't think anyone's ever going to be no one will overtly design a system to do this. And I don't think that I've talked to leaders in military, in intelligence, and no one has this point of view that this is a motivating factor. But when things were great, everyone had this ability to say, let's not go to war. Let's do everything we can to avoid conflict.
This feels very much like Ray Dalio's thesis that every time that you have a new world power rising and you have an economic superpower that's declining, you're going to end up in conflict. And I think that, and it's not 100% of the time, but it's something like 85% of the time historically. And Ray, I've talked about this on the show many times, but Ray did a survey, looked at the last 2,000 years, but really focused on the last 500 and the rise and fall of all these nations. He said it's always tied to the debt cycle. And what ends up happening is exactly what you've been describing. People just always want more. They're driven by desire. It's real fun in the beginning. And for a long time it works. And this is the problem. It'll work for between 150 and 250 years. If you play your cards right, you can do this. And so I think the reason that we end up in these hot wars is the turbulence of a rising superpower, China, a declining superpower, the US. You're already going to get frictions. They're jockeying. And to your point, war is great for business. And then there's another element to all of this, which is that, and this is the part that I am, as a born again, or not born again because I was never born, but as a late convert to understanding money, the thing that I really want people to pay attention to is when the government prints money, they get to take your money without asking Congress for permission.
That's right.
So they can have as much money as they want. It steals your buying power. It is literally the same as taxing you extra money, but they don't have to ask. And so they just go, oh, cool. I can rev up my economy by going and fighting in the Ukraine. I can rev up my economy by going into Israel, Palestine. awesome. I need to do that because we're in this debt spiral where I want my $7 trillion budget next year, but to get that, I know I'm going to be running a hotter deficit. And so the only way I'm going to be able to pay that debt off, especially as it gets refinanced at a higher rate, is I'm going to have to print money. Again, make it up out of thin air, which exacerbates the problem, but it also kicks the can down the road just enough. I can get elected, I can have my career, I can buy time as the empire basically slowly declines. And when people aren't able to track like all of the things that makes this system work, and forget who said it, but you don't need a conspiracy when all the incentives align.
That's right.
And so it's just, it is a perfectly aligned incentive structure, including, and you've gone to very effective lengths to make this clear, the voters are voting for it. And so ultimately, we're all a reflection of the same sort of human desire for more.
That's right.
So if people are going to vote not only in their sort of immediate short-term interest, but the long-term interest, they actually have to understand how all of this stuff works. And so to your point about making something really simple that people can track, that's what this feels like. All right, I have an idea that I don't hear many people talk about nakedly, and I'd love to get your take on it. I believe that one of the things that ought to be added to the Bill of Rights, and I use ought to imply a moral obligation, but one of the things I think ought to be added to the Bill of Rights is to have access to a non-inflationary store of wealth. Could be a currency. I haven't looked far enough to understand if gold still inflates, Bitcoin, something like that, or something else, whatever. I don't care what it is, as long as it's a non-inflationary place for me to store my wealth. I think we ought to be able to have access to that.
Well, the term inflation reflects the inflation in some denomination. So if you had bought gold 10 years ago, in US dollar denominated terms, gold has been a way for you to hedge against the inflation of the dollar. Gold prices have gone up, so your purchasing power has gone up more than the rate of inflation. But if you had bought gold in Bitcoin denominated terms and you use Bitcoin to buy your gold, you've actually not done a good job storing your wealth. Because if you had Bitcoin before in a Bitcoin denominated model, Bitcoin price relative to gold has gone up much faster. So remember, like, stores of wealth don't really mean anything because it's all stores of wealth are just a paired value. It's an asset relative to another asset. What am I counting it as? So you could own dollars and you have a non-inflation, you have something that you'll always have $100. It'll never change in terms of value. If you buy gold and you have inflation, the price of gold should go up in dollar denominated terms. So that hedges you against the loss in purchasing power of your dollars. I think from a Bill of Rights perspective, what we could do really well to think about is a balanced budget amendment, which means that the federal government has to balance the budget every year. They don't have the ability to accrue debt. And you could have a balanced budget amendment that accounts for cycles of war and the necessary investment in economic growth by creating some features in the amendment that allow for emergency authorization provided debt to GDP levels are within a certain range. Congress has authorized an actual war. I mean, there's a lot of ways to kind of protect against the things that everyone immediately counters with. And they're like, no, you can't take that power away from Congress. You got to let them stimulate. And I think what we've seen historically is the federal government's attempt to stimulate has negative long-term implications for in a lot of ways because we don't ever reverse the programs. We don't ever get back out of them. So I'd like to see from a Bill of Rights perspective, I'd rather see a balanced budget amendment, which I think protects my dollars better than forcing me to put, having the government involved in some new asset. But we have a free market, so we do have the ability to go out and buy whatever we want. And store our wealth.
We, until recent mumblings have started coming out of the SEC, certainly Biden has been very anti-crypto. Yeah. Gensler's been anti-crypto. And so this is what got me thinking about in terms of, hold on, I should have a right to this because you can, without any checks and balances, print my net worth away. Yeah. Which when you ask and answer the question, what is money? And you realize, oh, this is a way for me to store the economic output of my energy. So this is a way for me to say, I did a thing on Tuesday, and I'm going to be able to in some way capture the output of that effort that I can store for effectively ever. Now, if you create a system like they have done with fiat.
You mean without being inflated without
Correct.
right.
Correct. So if I have $100 worth of buying power in 100 years, I should have $100 worth of buying power in the same day, not where that changes dramatically and now I need $1,000. So if you give me that, now I don't have the weird perverse incentive to spend money today. I have an incentive to think long term. Now all of a sudden balancing a budget doesn't freak me out because I'm like, I don't need you, dear government, to be in control of all of the systems because I can actually save my money. And because my money doesn't go down in value over time, I can just stack chips. And so I can live however I want. But it has turned us, and it's always interesting having these conversations with a poker player. So when I first got into studying crypto, I realized it really attracts poker players, which is a gambling mentality. So clocking Bitcoin now, because I think when I brought that up and I said Bitcoin is a possibility, and you said, well, if somebody bought gold using Bitcoin, that would have been a mistake. Yes, but for a totally different reason, which is right now, Bitcoin is going through a period of adoption, which means it has massive volatility. Gamblers like the volatility. That's where they're going to make their money. But what I'm saying is I just want an asset that is, and we can look at gold. I want an asset that can't be inflated. Now I think this was on Rogan, people were arguing, why gold? Why is gold the store of value? It is my understanding the reason that gold is the store of value is because a star has to explode and rain gold on the earth for there to be new gold. And the only reason that it inflates by roughly 2% a year is that's what we can extract. And as you sort of balance out the supply and demand, even though you could probably get a little bit more, the incentive begins to break down. So anyway, we end up extracting roughly 2% more gold per year. So it does inflate by 2%, but because it is super hard to inflate, hard to fake, you can't turn dirt into gold like diamonds you can fake and all that stuff. So anyway, gold has these properties of not being inflatable and it doesn't mold or rot. So it will carry over time. So that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. Now, some people will believe in the Bitcoin version of that, but that's irrelevant to me. I just want something that cannot fall to the whims of the human desire to inflate it away, which we have shown over and over and over. If given a chance, people will do.
Yeah. I would say, look, I mean, I think that your principle is sound. I think that some people would argue that there are options like that, but everything carries some degree of risk. You're taking on association socially. Like if everyone gives up on gold, it's gone. If everyone gives up on Bitcoin, it's gone. The value goes down, right? So there is like a system of trust, like an aggregate kind of social system that has to continue to appreciate whatever it is that you're holding on to.
But that's already true of fiat currency. So fiat currency has the additional downside.
Until people start saying no, like I don't believe in it anymore.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So the same vulnerability that something like Bitcoin or gold has, you have in fiat currency. Yes. But at least with Bitcoin or gold, the governments, however much they may want to manipulate the supply, all they could do is buy it off the market, in which case there was an exchange of value at that point. But they can't make more magically.
Then you're having faith in your government's ability to continuously do that for the next 100 years for you.
To do what?
Protect your asset, whatever your new asset is.
Saying to protect my Bitcoin.
Yeah, or whatever your new asset that you're creating on your, whatever the new inflation protected asset is that you want them to give you a right to, right? The government at any point could change the laws. The government could lose its power. The government could lose its authority. There's some risk associated with anything.
For sure. But does that risk go up or down? That's my point. Right now, I feel like we're in the worst of all worlds where you're in a situation where you have a fiat currency that has no intrinsic value, which I don't mind people saying that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. Cool. It's all narrative. I'm here for that.
Yep.
But you've got this thing that has no intrinsic value that is 100% in the control of the government. As somebody who just has a weird pathological aversion to authoritarian rule, when I watched what happened in Canada, where the Canadian government was like, "Oh, truckers are protesting. I say less, fam. I got you. We're gonna look at your faces, clock your bank accounts, shut them down."
Totally.
Insane. Yeah. I cannot believe that happened in the last couple of years.
Australia during COVID, the UK. I mean, it's all over the West.
Dude, so crazy.
Even the East too. I'm sorry, it's everywhere. But yeah.
So that's the one that terrifies me. Mm-hmm. And so getting something, what I really want is the people of the United States to admit that this is important enough that we should see it as an inalienable right. We don't currently. So, but the knock-on effect, and by all means, if you think I'm out of my mind, keep pushing. But the knock-on effect of this is where I think this gets really interesting. And what does a world look like where my money isn't inflating? I don't have the perverse incentive to spend today and never save, because right now people that save are punished.
But you're basically proposing an inflation protected asset, right? Which definitionally means you can buy the same thing in the future as you can buy today for some number of units.
Yep.
So Big Macs can go up in price, and you can still buy 1 unit to buy 1 Big Mac, and in 20 years you can buy 1 Big Mac with 1 unit. But what if the price of Big Macs has gone up way more than the price of gasoline, or the price of gasoline has gone way up? So you're always indexing assets to other assets. They're always paired value. And so we use this term inflation, I think, a little loosely, in the sense that, like, we assume that, yes, there is generally devaluation happening with the dollars, but in some cases you can buy a lot more Brazilian reais with dollars today than you can 3 years ago, or a couple more. It's gone up by 20%. Then you could have, even though our ability to buy food has gone down. And so if I go to Brazil with my reais, I can buy more stuff, right? I can go to the UK now and buy more stuff because the value of the dollar relative to the pound has actually improved. So inflation in dollar denominated terms against food prices and energy prices and housing prices and car insurance and all the other things that we as consumers in the United States care about has gone the wrong direction. But when paired against other things around the world, against the yen, against the pound, against the real, the dollar's actually done well, which means that your purchasing power has gone up in those countries because you own dollars. We don't see that every day as consumers, and global trade helps solve that, by the way. And we can talk about globalization at some point, but I think that it's important to understand, what are you pairing against? What are you looking for protection from? Is it the price of food, or the price of energy, or the price of housing, or the price of medical insurance, or,
government manipulation of the monetary supply.
Yeah.
Period.
So then you shouldn't own currency, right? You shouldn't own dollars. And I think that these globally traded assets, these commodities like copper, gold, these are the sorts of Bitcoin potentially are the sorts of things. The challenge with Bitcoin, obviously, is that it's got a very anti-government orientation to it, which makes it the enemy of government. And so powerful government doesn't.
Trump has come out in aggressive support. RFK Jr., aggressive support. Now, RFK Jr. maybe has a slightly anti-authoritarian, anti-government bent as it is.
Yes.
So take that for what it's worth, but he's a legitimate candidate for president. So I can feel something shifting. I think, to your point, that what happens in the government is merely a reflection of what's going on in culture. And so you're seeing what I call the age of conspiracy. So COVID broke people's ability to trust the government.
Yep.
And I think that that's just continued to snowball. I think people may be letting that snowball too far, and now they're throw it all away, burn it all down, we'll start anew. That worries me far more.
Yeah.
But I think that they really are looking at the truth, which is that you're being lied to, you're being manipulated. Even if the people lying and manipulating are doing it with the best of intentions, they're lying, they're manipulating. So what I'm trying to get is a currency that they can't manipulate, even if they think they're manipulating it for my own good, so that, again, I don't have the perverse incentive to spend. I can save it. I can know what it's going to be. Now, I hear you in terms of the volatility.
It's just an asset. A currency is just an asset, and it's an asset that's valued against some other asset.
100%.
Right?
So let's take that head on. So you're never going to be able to, you can't and wouldn't want to try to squash the volatility in all of these things. So I would not want any protections on whatever asset class comes to be. I'll call it Bitcoin for now, just because for me, that is the asset class I'm treating like this. It has high volatility. We've already talked about that. In the future, I think it will be low volatility, and it will really be about its ability to not inflate.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. I've got this non-inflating asset. Even though I'm still in a world where stuff is all over the map, things are going up and down. One day, oil is going to be this many barrels per Bitcoin, and that's going to change. And if you're pricing your life and energy, which is probably a very wise way to think about it, then that's going to matter. I'm not saying that it won't matter. What I'm saying is, at least then only half of the equation has that level of volatility. And now I have a store of wealth that I can plug into. And maybe to really be effective at what I want it to be, it is a non-inflatable currency. I haven't thought about it enough to know whether I think that's better or worse, but maybe that's exactly what you need. So anyway, I don't I'm not worried about all the other volatility. But I do think that a natural knock-on effect of having this store of wealth, where I know $100, the buying power will be contiguous down the line, that will create a world where I can, as the consumer, I can benefit from deflationary things that happen in technology. So you planted a flag at the beginning of this conversation, which I think is brilliant, and I think most people do not understand, that the only way out of this spiral is innovation. Now, history tells us that ultimately even that breaks down and you end up missing. You end up not being able to innovate fast enough to keep up, which is why no empire ever in human history has lasted. People need to only think about that. Not once, not ever, in the whatever 25,000 years, 12,000 years, wherever you want to clock the starting of human empires, not one of them has ever lasted. They all fall away. So when you start looking at, okay, how are we going to make this work? Then it becomes making sure that you're getting a governmental structure that is not deranging because of the inflation. So if you're going to take advantage of the innovation, what you're really saying is, instead of generating innovation so that the government can print more money and effectively steal what should have been deflationary impact of that innovation. So you're about to, through Ohalo, you're about to drive the cost of potatoes down, as one example. I think you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. So as a consumer, I want to take advantage of that. What I don't want is the government to let inflation run hot, because they know that thanks to your breakthrough, the cost of groceries is about to plummet. And they're just going to come in and skim that off. And they're going to do money printing and be like, hey, potatoes are still only X amount. But let's say the potatoes, I have no idea what potatoes cost, $8 a bag. Yay, that's probably so wrong. But they're $8 a bag. With your innovation, that drops to, let's say, $4 a bag. But they keep it at 8 because they're going to skim that innovation advantage.
Well, the good thing is
off
the
the top.
government doesn't set price in markets, right? And when they start to, that's when things go awry.
What they do, though, is they manipulate the fiat currency. So I'm saying by printing the money,
Right.
they are making that potato go from what should have been $4, go back up to 8. And so that's why we don't see prices drop over time. Like if you think technology, the price of technology should just drop.
Like just to summarize, over the last 250 years, we've had incredible technological innovation. I'll start with the plow, the tractor. 60% of Americans worked in farming. It was an agrarian society until we got the tractor and we got hybrid seed and we got this ability to kind of mass produce food using machines and systems that we innovated, that we developed, that we built. And the cost of food went down. The wallet share of food has plummeted over the last 100 years. It's now coming back up, unfortunately, because of this recent inflationary cycle. The cost of fuel,
But do you see what I mean? Like the cost was coming down, inflationary cycle.
Well, yeah. So I'm aligning because as we've had all of these technological innovations, it's given us permission to spend more because the economy grows. This is what's counterintuitive. When productivity, when the cost of making something goes down, in terms of number of people involved, units of energy, units of land, units of input. Let's say I spend 15 cents to make this mug instead of 30 cents to make this mug. I can now make this mug cheaper. What you do as a consumer is you don't just buy one mug and pocket the savings. You buy 2 mugs. And then so the profits that I make just went up. And your ability to do stuff with those 2 mugs, like you could now mix stuff, has gone up. And so your productivity goes up and that makes you make more money. So the economy, what people don't realize is when the cost of things comes down, the economy grows. Productivity gains drive economic growth. When the economy grows, the net revenue you're making, the net revenue I'm making, the net revenue that everyone else is making goes up. Everyone's making more money. And if the government taxes everyone just the same amount, now the government has more money to spend. Consumers, voters have a choice. They have a choice to say tax less and spend less. But every voting cycle, voters have said spend more. And inevitably, the economic growth that has arisen from productivity gains, a percentage of it has gone into increasing the role that government has played in our economy. And generally, the role that the government has played in our economy has created inflation and distorted natural market forces. And so that's the narrative that I think captures kind of what you're saying, which is if we get continued technological progress, we can resolve some of the inflationary risks we're having, but the economy will grow and more tax revenue will be generated, and voters will say, let's do more. Let's have a new program where we all get free bus tickets. Let's have a new program where we have, you know, pick your choice, a free meal for everyone every week at McDonald's and the government's paying for it. You know, you go down the list, like there'll be new programs that will emerge. That's the history of the last 250 years. And it started out as a place where you could be free from the tyranny of the government's involvement in your everyday life and in the economic activity that you wanted to undertake as a business owner, as a worker, as someone that wanted to. So entrepreneurs came to this country for that freedom, and it still is the most free place, the most entrepreneur-friendly place, the most innovative place on planet Earth by far, and it is still the bastion for that. But the natural forces are that as things go well, more programs are launched, and all the people that we elect say, yeah, well, I'll give you more of that stuff in your hometown in Brooklyn or your rural Oklahoma. Let's do rural broadband. Or in South Florida, we're going to pay for all your docks at your ports now. And, you know, like suddenly it's like, let me give everyone something more from the federal level. And that's just the way it goes. You know, it's very hard to say that there's a individual or individual organization. This is a natural force of what's happened with governments over thousands of years, as you pointed out.
How often are you checking your credit score, afraid of identity theft or account breaches? We all use the internet every single day for important things like personal banking and remote work, so why not protect yourself with our sponsor, Aura? Aura is an all-in-one cybersecurity service that keeps you safe online. Aura identifies data brokers exposing your info and submits opt-out requests on your behalf. Aura also monitors your credit, tracks your passwords for data breaches, and secures your online activity with VPN and anti-malware protection. You can try Aura for free for 2 weeks by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code. Yeah, but in what I'm getting at is, I think the logical conclusion of having a non-inflatable asset class is that I can opt out of that madness. Because what will happen is the voters will say, the government will say, hey, we want to tax you more to give you this. They're going to say no. The government's going to be like, cool, no worries. We'll just print more money. Oh, word? That's a tax. Just it has better branding, so people don't realize it's a tax. But if I have my assets in a non-inflatable asset class, I'm opted out of that.
Yeah.
And so now what's going to happen is that's all going to come to a head real fast, because people are going to realize, wait, these guys that are storing their money over here, they still get the thing, but they don't actually participate in that socialized sweep
Cost.
Yeah, through money printing.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they're either going to join them, or people are finally going to understand that a tax is a tax by any name.
Mm-hmm.
So you can call it money printing, but it's just a tax.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. I think wealthy people have had this option. They could buy timberland. They could buy gold. They could buy other things that have kept them out of the damaging effect of inflation, because they can just sell that asset when they need cash, dollars, to buy stuff that's denominated in dollars. So that's largely what's fueled a lot of the wealth disparity in the US, in the West, is because as inflation has been driven by government program spending and increase in money printing, the wealthy have had the ability to protect their assets by making investments in assets that are inflation protected. And people that don't have the ability to do that have not. And their incomes haven't risen to make up for that. So I think what you're saying is sound, to give access to everyone what the wealthy have had access to. I think the question is, like, are they going to have enough assets to start with, right? That's the big conundrum that we have is have we gotten so far ahead? And that's where all these calls for taxing the wealthy come in. Let's take their assets away now and redistribute their actual assets as opposed to redistribute their income, which is the way taxes work today.
Would that work?
The U.S. is a very hard place to leave. When this happened in France, when they passed a wealth tax, and you can look this up, there was massive emigration out of France. And so the government authorized the ability to go in and pull people's assets as a tax every year. Some percentage of your net worth gets calculated. Elizabeth Warren's been proposing this in the U.S. Bernie Sanders has supported it. And again, what we've seen historically is if you start to do that, wealth taxes reduce investment, because I am now nervous to invest. I have less incentive to take risk to grow my asset base, because it's just going to be taken away from me if it grows. That's not directly true, but there's some psychological aversion to investing to some degree. So there's a reduction in investment. So the economy grows less. And then people opt out. They leave. They move to Puerto Rico. They move to Brazil. They move to Europe. Again, I don't know how many of my friends would do that. I think a couple of them would. I know a couple have already. But depends how far down you go and what percentage that is. But it's becoming a popular kind of thought amongst more kind of fringy type, like politicians. It's not a mainstream for sure, because mainstream politicians are going to lose their donor dollars if they even consider proposing that. So
yeah, it is a very interesting approach. What do you think about Milei in Argentina?
I love that guy.
Tell
That
me
guy's
more.
the man. I need that guy. I really want to meet that guy.
That makes two of us, by the way.
Yeah, that guy speaks truth to power. And what's amazing, I wonder if he is the beginning of the tipping of the policy and the systems that we just talked about, and the challenges that arise from the way that we have voted and the way that we have allowed government to grow and intertwine itself in markets and intertwine itself in individual lives in the way that we have. That Argentina's recovery from that and the voters saying we want this guy is a way to indicate that maybe things are tipping. In El Salvador, they put all the cartel members in prison.
Yeah.
And made Bitcoin a national currency. I think it's a national currency now, right? And so I think that there is maybe this moment where Milei is looked upon as the guy that speaks truth, not just to power, but to the individuals that now have access through social media and the internet and the ability to hear these sorts of voices clean and true on what we have done, what we have done to ourselves. And the term socialist is so deeply upsetting to people when you use that term, but socialized policies that provide massive social programs at the cost of taxation, which ultimately inflates things because the government's involvement distorts market forces, makes things more expensive. He's shown people that there is a way to recover from that and fix it and get out of it. And now he's shutting down these wasteful bureaucracies in the government in Argentina. He's shutting down these groups that should have never been created, these programs that should have never been created because they don't create much benefit for people. There's no accountability in how the money is spending. The cost does not justify the ends. And I think he's showing by example that this economy can grow, that people can prosper, that the government can run a surplus, and people can be taken care of without the wasteful nonsense that's gone on, the tentacles that have grown out of politicians standing on platforms saying, I'm going to make everything in the vending machine free. And what happens from that after 50 years, 100 years? Buenos Aires was like the Paris of the West. And it was the highest GDP per capita of anywhere in the world.
Whoa.
At the turn of the 20th century or late 19th century. It was this, go look at photos of Buenos Aires at this time, or not photos, artistic images. It was like this metropolis, this burgeoning industrial system. And social policies crept into Argentina like they did throughout Latin America in the 20th century. And there was multiple coups, multiple eradication of the free market system that allowed Buenos Aires to become what it had become, what Argentina had become in the late 19th, early 20th century. And then I think like this guy came along and said, people were sick of it. They've been through the pain. The US doesn't know pain. Like, we have no idea. We could go through another 30 years of this sort of inflation to come close to what Argentinians have been dealing with over the last 30, 50 years. So I think that like there's a breaking point where people are like, we need something different. These systems don't work. And he could be showing people the future. He's like, come from the future. I was joking with my friends the other day. I feel like he's Superman in Superman the movie, where he flies up into Earth. And remember, Lois Lane died. And then he like flies around the Earth and reverses time. And he brings everything back to a happy place. He's like Superman. He's taken the burden of spinning the world backwards on his shoulders to show us, to save lives. And so he feels like that guy to me. He's like a superhero. And I think that the fact that he doesn't give a shit, he acts like he has nothing to lose. He'll stand up on any platform and he'll speak truth to the circumstances, irregardless of the common refrain that's used to support these decisions. It's fantastic. So if anyone hasn't, I encourage them to watch his speech at the World Economic Forum.
It was incredible.
Incredible.
Can you recap some of it? His core message?
Basically, he said, like, the government, well, I don't want to get into the social stuff. There are aspects of liberalism in the West that he also addresses, which is that we have gone too far in trying to extend the role of government into creating equal outcomes as opposed to equal opportunity. And that plays out both in terms of social systems and in economic decisions. So in a natural market, there's a buyer and a seller. And the seller will only be able to sell if they can get a price and a product that the buyer wants, and the buyer will only pay the price they're willing to pay. When the government gets involved, the government doesn't care as much about the price because they can just print more money. So they distort the cost of stuff. They make things more expensive. That's one problem. The other one is that rather than just let the most competitive individual, the most successful entrepreneur, the hardest working person win, they're making other false choices about someone based on other social definitions of who that individual is, based on race or class or income. And he's also made this point that we've created distortions by introducing a lot of these programs that are trying to drive an outcome without giving freedom of opportunity to everyone. And that creates a distortion in the market. So there was an element both on, like, the government's building programs that are inefficient, that drive costs up, that destroys economic forces, that destroys markets, and in, like, these social policies that are very well intended. Like, we want to give everyone in the society a good life. The problem is that sometimes that action causes destruction of the natural market force that might allow the best person, the hardest working person for the college that got into college to actually go there, or the best business to succeed in selling their products. So there's a lot of these kind of social policies that get wrapped up, many of which we could dissect. It's like, is the cost worth the trade-off? And some would argue yes.
Yeah, watching the speech, one of the reasons I loved it so much is that he really goes hard in the paint about, let me just tell you what happened to Argentina. We were, I don't think he said the Paris of the West, but, like, we were one of the great cities of the globe. We were so successful that we started adopting socialist policies. We did this to ourselves. It completely destroyed our country. And it had, like, this Ayn Rand brought to life quality about it, where it was like, hey, maybe we all wish that capitalism did work, but capitalism does work. It brings more people out of poverty than any system that's ever been tried. And he just had, one, the historical context to be like, hey, this has been tried over and over and over. It never works, leads to death, leads to destruction. I watched it happen in Argentina, same thing play out. And the way that we're going to get back to it is we're going to balance a budget, and we're only going to spend what we make, and we're going to make sure that we are the home for innovation, that we invite the greatest minds from around the globe to come to Argentina and create and build incredible things and create the space for that. And it's interesting because you talked about, it's hard to leave America because America is still the king of innovation, and this is where people want to come. And there's a cultural tradition of celebrating people that do great things.
Historically.
Why do you say that? Because this, I think, is why I'm bringing it up.
This has changed.
Tell me about it.
Well, I think that this disparity in wealth that arises from successful entrepreneurism, and the majority of Americans, if you look on an inflation-adjusted basis over the last 10 years, have not seen their incomes rise. And so going back to my original point, happiness is driven by changes in income. So when we got social media, look, there was always media, but now there's, like, so much more access. I get to see what Kanye West is doing every day. I get to see the plane that Kim Kardashian is flying in. I get to see what Justin Bieber, like, how much he's spending on his new Lamborghini. Like, there's an element now of insight that I have as a citizen that I never had. And we always had ultra wealthy people in capitalist societies. There were always people who have outsized returns. Someone who figures out how to make a golden goose can start making more golden geese and more golden geese before anyone else figures out how to make a golden goose. And so they get this outsized return. They get this incredible outcome in a capitalist system. But I always look at Jeff Bezos because he's like so many people have such a negative view of the guy. But the guy gave us this ability to get whatever we want tomorrow at a fraction of the cost of what I was paying even at Walmart.
It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. Like the technology and the innovation and the investment that they made, they kept reinvesting every dollar they made. And people thought they were crazy because they were never making money. And he's like, I'm going to keep investing. I'm going to keep investing. And he created this infrastructure that has unlocked value for everyday consumers, that people can buy stuff and have access to a toy for their kids for $8 and it shows up on your doorstep tomorrow. Or lower priced food, or like this thing that you wouldn't otherwise be able to buy because no stores in your neighborhood sell it. This incredible unlock in prosperity. That's a definition of prosperity for individuals. But he's bemoaned for having $160 billion and hanging out on a yacht. Like Millet said, we should be celebrating this dude. He's a superhero, what he did. What he did for, if what he did wasn't valuable, he wouldn't be worth 160 billion. There was no cronyism. This guy didn't go in and steal wealth. He didn't go in and like steal a mine and pull all the diamonds out of the mine and, you know, prevent the local people from accessing the diamonds. This guy built a business. He innovated. And that's what has happened countless times in the United States over the last 250 years. And the reality is that individuals don't necessarily pay attention because now we're all used to Amazon. We're all used to our iPhones. So the change in benefit we're getting, it's taken for granted, I think. But my income isn't going up as an individual. I'm not making more money, but this guy's got $200 billion. That's unfair. I think the world is made up of haves and have-nots. Everyone thinks that they're a have-not relative to some other have. And everyone is a have to some other have-not. That simple fact is what drives all social policy, all of politics, all of the economy, everything. Because it goes back to my point about desire. If I'm a have-not relative to someone else's have, I see what they have that I don't have. I want to tax them. I want to get them. I want to compete with them in the market if I am an entrepreneur. I want to go get the market share they have. I want to get a politician to take their stuff away from them. And if I'm a have, and there's a have-not trying to get me, I want to vote for a politician that's going to protect my assets. And I want to vote for a politician that's going to give me freedom to continue to have stuff. And I'm going to have conflict with the person that is a have-not that says that they want to have what I have, because it's my thing. It's not their thing. I worked hard for it. I deserve it. So that dynamic is what drives all of this. And I think that it goes back to the point earlier about government spending. The have-nots vote to get what the haves have or to take stuff away from the haves. And then the government is the agent by which we can all accumulate our power to exercise that action. That's where government programs come from. And the haves are viewed as bad by the have-nots, particularly as it relates to individuals with wealth, when individuals are not seeing their income grow. And so today, unfortunately, I think successful entrepreneurs are cast in a negative light generally. Elon has gotten very socially active. He's got very politically loud, but he's an incredible entrepreneur who's built these amazing cars that everyone wants. And he's got this platform for communication that he wants everyone to be able to access without restriction, which is unique. And his entrepreneurism is not celebrated. It's viewed as a threat. It's viewed as something this guy has stuff. He has power, is what politicians see, as power with this open platform. He has success with his car company that the other car companies don't have. So they want to pass legislation to hurt him. He has wealth that individuals don't have. So they hate him. He's viewed as a right winger because he doesn't agree with my policy, and he has the ability and the megaphone to be able to say that because he's wealthy. So he's negative. He's an evil character now, largely. So I think that's what we've kind of seen this. And if you go back to the 50s, I mean, look, throughout American history, we've had some folks that we've bemoaned, but there was a lot of cronyism in the early days. I don't think there's as much cronyism today. I think that there's just a lot of have-not dynamics that are driving this.
Okay, so how does that play out? Because this strikes me as something that if it goes too far, Lenin, the bad guy, had a very useful quote, which is, if you give me one generation of young people, I will completely change the world. Meaning that whatever values and beliefs you inculcate them with will completely become their entire worldview. And so if we raise not one, not two, three, four, I don't know how many generations of people that vilify the successful, well, then people aren't going to aspire to be the successful. So how do you think this plays out?
I could argue both sides. So I could say that we head down a socialist tunnel if we're not careful, where we want to make sure that everyone has equal outcome, which is what Bilyeu warns against. When the reality is equal opportunity, everyone has access to participate is what really drives success and drives equality. And as long as there are some young people that will step out and build businesses and innovate and build new technology and participate, we do have enough of that spirit in the United States still. So I'm very optimistic about like US entrepreneurism. I could be worried about the loud voice of the mass saying we need to revolt and return to a equal outcome. We need to get to an equal outcome society, and redistribute all the wealth and redistribute all the assets and redistribute all the access and so on. But I think that there's still enough young people that succeed through entrepreneurism that they can become beacons and lights for the, for making sure that folks don't fall that way. We need to shine light and support and applaud. So I don't have a great answer for you on this, because I think you could see things go either way. I mean, I think generally I have this worry that we're at this very, and this is a broader scope point, that we're at this very weird like intersection of choosing between like the Dark Ages and the Enlightenment, which I've said on my show, like, do we want to stop innovation because we're fearful of technology, because we're fearful of progress, because we're fearful of the downside, because we don't like entrepreneurs, because we don't want people to accumulate wealth, because we hate success, because we want the government to do stuff for us and not individual companies? That's the Dark Ages. And if that wins the day...
Why would that be the Dark Ages?
So, well, I'll just say another thing about this. One of the ways that this gets supported is the absence of empiricism, fact, data. Because as Bilyeu points out, all the data shows that entrepreneurism, that capitalism is better than socialism. He said this, the data is there, economists will show you. You're not going to compel someone that socialism is better unless you leave out all the data that supports that capitalism is better, okay? So you have to have an absence of information. I can wax a little too philosophical here because it ends up going on too much of a tangent, but I do think that there's this element of human beliefs that allow us to do incredible things. Like we have to come together and believe in something as a group to accomplish a mission, to build something. Like we all get together and like, let's build a house. I believe in the vision of that house, so I'm going to build that house with you. It takes more than one person to build that house. We all have to work together. So the belief allows us to accomplish the building of the house. But that also then opens up room for humans to believe in things that aren't empirical, that aren't supported by data, that maybe will take us down a different path. And so we can believe that the data is right and good, or we can ignore the data and believe in something else. And so I do see a lot of alarming behavior, things that worry me, particularly on media and from politicians, where they say things that aren't true and then people believe them. That's what happened in the Dark Ages. And it, like, whether it's the monarchy or the church at the time or whatever group was in power, they told people something that they were told to believe that allowed them to maintain their status. And then we ended up saying, no, the sun revolves around the earth. The earth doesn't revolve around the sun, despite the data that this crazy guy is talking about. Ignore the crazy guy. His data is wrong. What we're telling you is right. That's the Dark Ages. We ignore empiricism, we ignore fact, and we don't make progress. And the Enlightenment is that we get into a more positioned rational thought mode where let's use data to make decisions. Let's look at the performance of a government program to decide whether or not we want to keep doing it. Let's look at the results of this experiment. Let's make sure that data guides us. Let's make sure that we have a principled rational thought about discussion about what we should do. And that's not what we hear from politicians. I don't hear anyone standing up there. I mean, I think Vivek probably did the best job of this. Like, he actually came out and gave facts about and figures about the size of some of these government programs and what they were doing and the success or failure of them, Millet has shown this. There's a world where we embrace technology, where we say we're not going to be fearful of loss, but we're going to embrace the risk because the upside is worth it. We can go to the moon. We can go to Mars. We can cure cancer. Some people will die, but we can do it. We just have to be willing to do it. We can look at the data and iterate and be successful. Or this stuff is bad. This technology is bad. This idea of capitalism is bad. The celebration of the entrepreneur is bad. And I think that's like this moment, this crossroads that we are at. And I don't think it's like we just go one way or the other. I think we have that choice every day. But I think we should really take a hard look at are we launching new science, new technology, supporting innovation, supporting entrepreneurship, supporting free markets, and allowing the individual that has the brilliance and the ability to narrate and the ability to bring people together to succeed? Or are we saying, let's stymie that, let's shut it down, let's use false facts and falsehoods and the absence and regulation and all this other stuff to kind of keep things from progressing? And we have this moment where there's this crazy set of things happening right now in science. Most people don't understand it. They don't get how crazy it is. But we are understanding how to reverse aging in every cell in our body. And there are several multi-billion-dollar private companies doing this. There are several multi-billion-dollar private companies building fusion reaction systems to create unlimited energy at effectively free production costs coming from ocean water. Either of those two things happen, humanity's trajectory changes completely. We could live forever or whatever. We could live for hundreds of years. We could have infinitely free energy. And going back to your earlier point, with infinitely free energy, I could actually make gold out of dirt. So that system does start to exist when energy costs decline. We have AI. We have this ability for all of human knowledge to be encapsulated in a device that I can keep in my pocket. And it can answer any question for me and do anything for me using knowledge work. And I can spend all my time pursuing my vision of the future and creative pursuits and things that I'm interested in doing without all the tedium of dealing with data and dealing with knowledge and dealing with labor, because machines can do that for me now. There's all these kind of moments that we're kind of just coming up this curve right now. Yeah, and every one of them, there's an effort to stymie them with regulation. There's an effort to denounce the technology as being too risky. It could kill us all. It's too dangerous. We shouldn't be doing fusion. We shouldn't be doing AI. We shouldn't be doing, or we need to be doing it carefully, which means the government has to come in and control and regulate it, which means that all of the innovation is going to be stymied. That's the dark ages, right? That's where we miss out on all of this upside. And I think we're not accustomed to taking risk anymore as we were when we were pioneers in the West in the United States, because the people that were pioneers in the West in the United States had nothing to lose. They had nothing. They had a backpack, a satchel, and a horse, and a wagon, and an ox, and they made their way Oregon Trail style. And they got a piece of land and they built something. Today we have so much to lose. I got 2 cars and a suburban driveway. I've got, my kids, I've got my IRA. I've got stuff. So I don't know if I want to take the risk of dying from this new thing. I don't know if I want to go to Mars. Going to Mars is cool, but I don't know.
Interesting. I think that part of what's at play here is ideas. So I think ideas, what people will often think of as culture, and momentum, those are the two things that really matter. And so when I am a default optimistic person, and I'm becoming a little bit more optimistic in the narrow, acute moment that we're living in now. But if you had asked me a year ago, I was getting pretty pessimistic about the direction we were going from an authoritarian perspective. Yeah. Elon didn't own Twitter yet. People didn't seem to want any freedom of speech. We were just coming out of COVID where I thought people acted like psychopaths. It was just bananas in terms of people giving up all of their freedom in exchange for safety. It was a very strange time. And when I think about the ideas that have people in their grips, the ideas are not necessarily the ideas of old. So I will say that he's a very controversial figure now, but it's somebody I have tremendous respect for, which is Winston Churchill. Mm-hmm. Now, he grew up a man of means, but despite that, he was so in the grips of a set of ideas around the greatness of England and Britannia that he was so... For people that don't know his story, he has a really fascinating moment in World War I where he fights and fights and fights to get into politics, finally gets into politics, gets assigned to, I forget the name of the place, but it was a naval station. And he ends up messing up massively. And it completely destroys his career. And everybody, this is World War I, remember, the guy that's later going to be famous for World War II is like, I'm done. I no longer have a career. I've made an extremely big public mistake. But he doesn't go wallow in it. Instead, he goes, I want to immediately be put on the front lines of World War I, and I'm going to earn my way back into the government. And so they put him on the front lines of arguably one of the most gruesome, bloody wars ever. This is trench warfare. And he said to his mother, it matters so much to me to have a reputation for physical courage, meaning I'm not brave at a desk where, it's like quite easy to be brave. I'm getting shot at and I'm brave. And so he used to do like all these like really dangerous, they were just like routine sort of you walk the perimeter thing. And people didn't want to go with him because when he would get shot at, he would just stand there. And people were like, what are you doing? And he's like, by the time they've shot at you, you either got hit or you didn't. And so he's like, now the danger is, it's past. And so he just had this attitude of like, I'm not going to be cowed. I know what we're here for. I'm going to get this done. I'm going to lead. I'm going to show people what it's about. That is a guy who had everything to lose. But what he was focused on was somehow, some way, the idea got planted in his mind that what mattered was self-respect. And when I look back in history and look very much, these could be the blinders, the rose-colored glasses that I wear about my own life. But so I grew up middle to lower middle class. And my parents were just like, all right, we can't give you money. In fact, I graduated college with debt. Can't help you there. But my dad was obsessed with kids, you're going to learn work ethic. Mm-hmm. And so from the time I was 12, I worked in a door factory, then a paint factory, then a paint warehouse, like just doing all these horrendously physical labor jobs that I did not enjoy in the slightest. And my dad just kept saying, but you're going to know how to work when other people don't. And you need to respect that. And you need to understand how that's going to serve you. And so, of course, that ends up, I remember one of the earliest, we got a video of this, but it somehow got lost in the sands of time. Quest starting nascent, of course, everything is hard. And I had learned how to drive a forklift back in the paint warehouse days. And when all of our equipment showed up, we realized, oh my God, we don't have a forklift. We have no way to get this equipment off this truck. And we're all like, oh, everyone else was looking around saying, how are we going to do this? And I was like, guys, I'm actually a certified forklift driver. And they're like, what? And so we borrowed a forklift and I was able to get all of our gear off the truck. And I looked in the camera and I said, Dad, wax on, wax off. You told me that all these skills would come in handy one day. And so, but that set of ideas drove me. And it was the desire to get good at things that I wasn't good at, to earn a reputation for being the hardest worker in every room that I was in. Yeah. And so all of those things then end up paying off. And then I remember when I first got on camera, I was telling people all the time, hey, you should go out, work for free, learn something, exchange, instead of trying to optimize for money, optimize for knowledge and connections. Yes. And I would just get lit up. Oh, Tom, like these people are just being taken advantage of. Of course you say that because you're rich. And I was like, hold on. Do you know how I got rich? Like I wasn't trying to maximize my dollar. I was trying to maximize knowledge and connections. And so I can feel that a spirit has changed in some way, and that people are no longer in the grips of the same ideas that I was raised with, that it was just the water in the 80s to be the hardest working person in the room, to strive for more, to like pick your biggest dream and go for it, to celebrate people who were successful. And to like my whole life until it actually happened, I was the temporarily embarrassed millionaire, right? Yeah, I'm broke today, but I'm not going to be broke forever. And so that whole spirit has been exchanged for what you laid out earlier. Yeah.
Like people just expect.
Correct.
So that worries you?
That worries me to no end. And my default stance is that this is a pendulum that swings, and it only swings based on pain. And it will keep going in one direction until it is absolutely intolerable, and we will swing back. Right. And the reason that I do this show is that what you need is not just pain, you need pain plus an idea. And so when you have a good idea, hopefully, if you have somebody that can articulate that idea well, that you don't have to be in as much pain before you change course. But yes, when I look at Trump, Biden as the nominees for 2024, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a group of people who need enough pain to go, this is ridiculous.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's also like, you could ask yourself, what do we celebrate? Like in the early 20th century, mid 20th century, we celebrated people working hard. We celebrated entrepreneurs and scientists having breakthroughs. If I ask you the question today, what do you think we celebrate today?
Victimhood, unfortunately.
Victimhood?
You've had it hard.
Celebrity?
Yeah, but that gets a bit of a mixed bag. But yes.
So I think that's the indicator for you. And if that's what we pronounce, if that's what we celebrate, that's what we manifest. The problem is, like, I think the folks who do get recognized, like it used to be movie stars who were like great success, business tycoons were lauded. Now it's a celebrity who did a lot on Instagram. And the problem is that's out of reach for everyone. Like that's what everyone aspires to. Is everyone, like, I think that was the number one thing out of a recent survey coming out of high school, is like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Social media influencer, because that's what we celebrate. And I think that the challenge then is like, well, people that are building businesses in other ways, people that are making stuff, scientists, it becomes a very hard thing to kind of relate, very obvious things as to why we're not really seeing people pursue those interests, because it's not really what we celebrate as much. So
yeah, so my hope is that we can begin to celebrate some creation, innovation, risk-taking, people that are bold, success, people that pull it off. Like when I look at Elon Musk, I get it. Like I get why some people don't like his politics. Fair enough. I mean, it's there's a bit of a sort of boyish troll, nature to his his ongoings on X. But at the same time, he is the greatest entrepreneur of our generation, as far as I know. There might be somebody that's done even more, but holy hell. And I'm thinking of Bezos right alongside of him. Yeah. Bezos is amazing, but when I look at the way that Elon has been able to replicate it in just wildly different companies, it's pure insanity. And doing it from an engineering standpoint is really, really breathtaking. But of course, like you said, they're being vilified. Okay, to really begin to tease this out, walk me through, where do you see the key areas of innovation that you think have the shot at pulling us out of the debt spiral, that could reinvigorate people, get them excited, create a life of, I'm assuming, energy abundance, or just dropping costs on things that people really care about is going to be a key part of that. What's going on that we should be really looking at?
Well, there's not much to act on or to know about. There's this option. It's like a call option that the price is like 10 cents right now on things like fusion energy, right? So fusion energy is this whole new way of creating energy. You can take heavy water molecules. It's like water with an extra neutron. And if you get them moving fast enough, if you get hydrogen moving fast enough, and you get two of them together, they fuse and they release energy. And there's a net energy output. So you got to get them moving fast enough and close enough. So high energy, high density. So the way we do that is the same way the sun does it. The sun is a giant plasma fusion reactor. Plasma means that all the electrons have spun off the atom, and all that's left is the nucleus, the protons. Two protons fly into each other. When they fuse, they end up forming helium from hydrogen, and in the process release some energy. And then there's all these other fusion reactions that happen in the sun, and all that energy is released in the form of what's called neutrinos, as well as light photons, as well as electrons that kind of come out in these plasma releases that come out, these jets. So the energy from the sun heats us, right? Those photons drain us, they drown us, they're heating us, and we're just getting a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of all the photons coming out every second from the sun that's just gonna run these fusion reactions for billions of years before it runs out and everything's been fused together. We can now do that, or we are trying to do that on Earth in a controlled way by creating a plasma where we take these atoms and we spin them around, and we spin them so that they're going so fast and then we use a magnet to try and squeeze them so they're super close together. And when they're close together, they start to fuse, and we capture the energy that comes out. And all the physics of doing this took us decades to understand and figure out and start to build little engineering systems. And in the last decade or so, there's been a bit of a renaissance and acceleration in fusion technology. We don't have anything doing it today at scale, but there's a lot of companies. There's about 70 companies now that have been started up that are doing fusion reaction systems. And if any one of them works, theoretically, you could take water from the ocean and using just 2 swimming pools of water, power all the energy needs of planet Earth on all of our systems today. Isn't that crazy?
Whoa.
So that's fusion. It's not here today. Everyone's always like, it's a decade away. It's always been this kind of thing that people are like calling bullshit on all the time. But the underlying engineering is improving. The underlying science is there. So this could be a reality in our lifetimes. And then you could see fusion reactors everywhere, which drops the cost of power and increases the availability of energy dramatically. That's super interesting. Everything largely can be replaced with energy in terms of cost. You can make more stuff. If the cost of energy goes down, you make more and more stuff at a lower cost. You can make new materials. You can run computers. I mean, like, the power of energy is a huge driver for economic prosperity and growth. And historically, energy consumption has increased per capita as GDP per capita has gone up. So we've demanded more energy as we've become more prosperous. And so that's only going to grow. If we want to have a prosperous society, we need to make a lot more energy. And if you look at where GDP is projected to grow by the end of the century, which is totally random, like math, and you project where population is going to grow by the end of the century, the GDP per capita demands that we have to increase energy production on Earth by something like 3 to 10x. 10x plus, some people would say. How are we going to increase energy production by 10x on this Earth? We can't. So we need a new paradigm. We need a new system. So that's the argument for fusion, why it's potentially game-changing, but still a ways away. Gene editing is a game-changing technology. So we're using this ability to use proteins to go in and alter genes for human therapies, for destroying cancer, for creating new cells, T cells that can go in and destroy cancer.
How much is this happening right now with real human cells?
Yeah, all over the place. So there's tons of gene therapy products on the market now. There's 2 categories. There's gene therapies, where you actually go and alter the genes in cells where you have DNA errors. You have problems with one of your genes. And there's a lot of these diseases that people are born with, where one of their genes has a letter that's wrong. And a gene is just a sequence of DNA. It's a bunch of letters. And every gene makes a protein. That's what genes are. They're just the code to make a protein. And there are these little things in our cells called ribosomes. They take a sequence of the gene, they take a copy of the gene, and it's like a little ticker tape. It sucks it in and it prints out a protein. So ribosomes make proteins, millions of them a second in every cell, just pumping them out. And they come from the gene expression that happens off the DNA. So genes are the code for proteins. And then proteins are the machines that do everything in life, in biology. Proteins stick stuff together, they rip stuff apart, they assemble new molecules. So the genes make the proteins that make everything. Proteins are like little robots in biology. They make everything. So when there's something wrong with a gene, when there's a letter that's off, the protein can be dysfunctional and you can have a disease. So we now have this ability to go in and change that sequence of that genome in your cells and improve it for all these different conditions that are being addressed now. There's a separate area of medicine, which is cell therapies, where we're taking cells and then editing the DNA of those cells to get them to go and do something in the body. And then we stick them back in the body and they go and kill cancer cells, or they go and repair something. And so there's about 8 or 9 of those products on the market today.
Wow.
For cancers. And people that get these cancers get this therapy, cancer's gone. It's unbelievable. So we reprogram a T cell, we stick it back in the body, and it goes and destroys the cancer. By the way, that's 15 years old technology. The stuff that's going on now is like light years ahead of that. And it has to go through clinical trials and regulatory approvals and testing and all that stuff. But the stuff that's coming to market over the next couple of years, there's over 1,000 cell and gene therapy products in testing and trials right now to come to market.
Are you aware of any that really show promise?
Lots. I mean, things that can cure blindness. Again, lots of cancer therapies, lots of autoimmune therapies. Everything you can think about in terms of human disease can be addressed by some cell or gene therapy product that's in trials right now, very likely. And then the other stuff I mentioned earlier, which is actually changing the epigenetics. So not just the genes, but changing which genes are turned on and off in a cell can actually make the cell super young. This was discovered by a guy named Yamanaka. He won the Nobel Prize for this. You have all these cells in your body. They all have the exact same DNA. The only thing that makes one cell different from another cell is which genes are turned on or off. So I told you earlier, genes are just making proteins. If some of those proteins are turned off, that cell looks like a skin cell. And if other proteins are turned off and other ones are turned on, that cell starts to look and act like an eye cell or a muscle cell or a heart cell. So all the cells in our body are different because of the genes that are turned on or off. So Yamanaka figured out that if you turn off all the genes, or if you turn on all these genes using this thing called the Yamanaka factors, basically 4 chemicals you apply to the cell, they're proteins, then the cell acts like a stem cell, like an original cell from the embryo. And you can then use that cell and turn it into any other cell and make new eye cells or make new skin cells or all this other sort of stuff. So creating stem cells using Yamanaka factors and working with them in research is what all biologists and life sciences research are doing today. That's like common practice. People don't realize this. But later it was discovered that instead of resetting the cells back to being like stem cells, you could partially reset them. So a slight changing in the dosing of the factors and putting different factors in caused the cells, instead of acting like a stem cell, they actually reset all of their epigenetics, which genes are on or off, back to how they're supposed to be when you were first a kid. And suddenly those cells start to work like when you were young. They're more youthful. They have more energy. They are not spending all their time trying to fix up all the mistakes that the cell's doing. What happens is the reason we age is as we get older, the stuff that turns genes on and off in our cell degrades. And so the gene regulation of a cell is wrong and the cells become dysfunctional. And when the cell becomes dysfunctional, our skin wrinkles, our eyesight goes, our hearts start beating slower, our liver doesn't do its job, our kidneys don't do its job. So all those cells are slowly not doing their job as well. The muscles don't move as fast. But if we could reset those cells so that the genes that are turned on and off are correct again, then all those cells will work perfectly. You have everything you need in your body. All the DNA is intact in all your cells. All your cells are normal cells. They just have the wrong genes turned on or off. So if we can reset that, suddenly all the cells act young. So there are several companies that are doing this work that have shown progress, that it looks like there's going to be a path at some point in our lifetime to actually rejuvenating cells in our body, which is just an insane thing to think about. We see it in labs. We see it working in mice. We see it working in other animals. It's just a matter of time before we get all the pieces together and create therapeutics around this. Imagine becoming like a young person again by popping a pill or taking some treatment. So that's another area that's super interesting, is this like rejuvenation. And then gene editing being applied, like the work I do is mostly in agriculture, working in plants, and we're totally changing a lot about making plants more genetically diverse and increasing the yield, improve the performance, the health, the growth, how quick the plants grow. Humans use half of our land to grow stuff, to grow animals or to grow crops. We have the ability to actually improve the quality of all those crops, make them grow faster, bigger, healthier. And so we've developed a system for doing that. And so that's another, this whole technology area is super interesting. And then obviously AI, everyone talks about AI. So
tell me, what are your thoughts? I think that's an important one.
AI is just an unlock for people. When some of the tools first came out, I remember I used to use Adobe Photoshop as a kid. I would do like a lot of graphics and like stuff in Photoshop for fun or for work. I would like go out as a kid and like do jobs with people and stuff. And I got Kai's Power Tools. Do you remember Kai's Power Tools? I don't know if you ever used Photoshop. It was like this plugin for Adobe Photoshop in the 90s where it could do filters. So you could blur your photo or you could pixelate it or sharpen it. And it was statistics applied to the matrix of pixels. So each pixel is a number. It's a matrix. It's got a row and a column, and each one's got a number. And basically you could apply a statistical function to that matrix of numbers and it would change what those numbers were. And when you look at it visually, it looks like the photo got blurred or the photo got sharper. So it was incredible. Like you could use statistics to do stuff that people that were previously using Photoshop had to go in pixel by pixel and change. And they were just kind of looking at it and then they change it and they look at it. That's what AI is. It's this statistically driven unlock for us where our productivity goes through the roof. Where instead of going in and changing every pixel, I can just say, hey, I would like to write a book today, 300 pages, and it's about government involvement in markets. Go source all the data for me, aggregate it in my style, and then I want to go in and edit it with you. And by the end of the day, I've written a novel. Like, that's the unlock that AI provides. Individuals can have more freedom and can be more productive and create more stuff. And again, going back to our earlier point, the cost now of being a writer, a copywriter, goes down. The value of being a copywriter goes down. So the income for the copywriter goes down. But the ability for someone to now create 100 novels a day increases output. And so the economy grows, the market grows. And so that copywriter can go become a novelist, and they can write 100 novels a day. And so now there's more novels for everyone. And so the consumption goes up.
That one feels more inflationary than that consumption will go up. But so the big thing that I wanted to get a sense of is, okay, there's a lot of really amazing things happening in technology, but I think it needs to be married to your earlier point. Are people going to reject this, or are they going to embrace it?
Right.
So let's take the ones that you laid out on the table. So gene editing, I think that's huge. You've got gene editing inside the human. You've got gene editing inside of the plants. You've got AI and the impact that those are going to have. Those three feel very germane to the argument of, are people going to embrace these, or are they going to reject them? I'd love to know your take. Do you think that we embrace these, and as much as, I mean, you can give it to me however you want, but as much as you can hew to what you think will actually happen, knowing the way that humans respond would be incredible.
So I think seeing the benefit is the unlock, right? So in human health, we see the benefit of these tools because people's diseases are being cured. So suddenly the concept of gene editing, or the concept of using gene editing to create new therapies, which sounded scary in the first place and everyone was against, suddenly it's like, wait, my uncle got cured from cancer with one of those therapies. This is awesome. And I think that we're seeing that. So that term is no longer an evil term because consumers can now see the problem with technology is it's always ahead of the curve. Like, you see the AI stuff shows up, people talk about it. Terminator 2 came out 30 years ago, right? People see all these things before they realize the benefit from them. And I can tell you, if someone got their energy bill cut by 75%, they probably wouldn't complain as much about having a nuclear power plant 100 miles away from their home. They'd be like, wow, that's pretty amazing. Like, and, then you understand all the protocols for safety and all the regulatory systems that keep you safe and so on. And in human therapies, we're seeing all these lives being saved, and we're not hearing tons of stories about people dying from gene therapy. So the attitude shifts and the benefit is there. So I think that's what happens over time. And unfortunately, in the early days, there's a lot of this wait, don't go too fast, slow down, make sure this works, make sure the benefit is there, make sure the downside is understood and protected. And, there's decent systems to do that, but it's not viewed necessarily as an innate good until people realize the benefit. And then it becomes a little bit more innate good. Like, if I tell you antibiotics, it's interesting. If you fast forward, antibiotics, people died from infections all the time before we had antibiotics. Now we got antibiotics, you get an infection, you take one, you live. You kind of take that a little bit for granted now. Now people are like, antibiotics, they wipe out your gut biome. I generally try and avoid them, just to be clear. I don't think they're great, but if you're going to die from an infection, you got to take a fucking antibiotic. Yes, yeah. I need an antibiotic. So, so I think that there's also this element of, at some point, maybe we get to take things for granted a little bit too much, and we forget about, once you're on the other side of that curve, now it's I could start to talk bad about it again. It's
interesting. I have a slightly more
negative.
I try not to ever say jaded, but perspective on this. So I think we're going to go through something very weird over the next 3 to 5 years. And it's going to be largely driven by technology and some of the promises we thought it would deliver, but didn't. So if you look at what happened with social media made all these promises, it's going to make you feel connected. It clearly has not done that. If you read Jonathan Haidt's work, it's increasing rates of suicide among young kids, causing some sort of disturbances that cause them to really struggle with anxiety, depression. Also gave the government a way to manipulate people. And so now people have this really jaundiced eye toward, they still use it, but they have a really jaundiced eye towards what it is and how it can be used to weaponize against you. GMO foods become this incredible unlock that allows us to feed the billions of people that we thought were just going to collapse the planet, and Malthus was going to be right and everyone was just going to die. And it didn't happen. And it didn't happen largely because we make huge innovations in agriculture, which allows us to feed people with things that require less water, are more hardy, resistant to drought, plague, so on and so forth. Absolutely incredible. And yet you have people that are like, I won't eat GMOs. I won't let it touch me. No way. This is bad. This is horrible. Monsanto, I know your last company was bought by Monsanto. People just think of it as the Death Star, the evil empire. So there's like all this AI. I mean, don't even get me started on people are going to reject that. I think with AI and Neuralink type things where you're augmenting the human body, I think there's going to be a true bifurcation, and there will be Puritans who are like, I'm pure. I don't have any augmentations in my body. I don't use microtechnologies, which of course will be tied into conspiracies and all that. Don't augment my body. I don't use AI. I don't engage with it at all. And then you'll have people that go hard the other way. I've augment with everything that I can get my hands on, and I don't have real friends. It's all AI. My wife is AI. All my friends are AI, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I think that you're going to start to see in the next 3 to 5 years the beginning of that split. And then where is that in 15, 20 years? I think is going to be pretty dramatic. Now, I think the people that don't embrace new technologies will end up being relatively small. But whether it's just sort of a disdain for each other or whether that actually erupts into localized violence, I don't know. We'll see.
The split you define is probably easier to think about in terms of people that are wealthy and have the luxury and the privilege of not adopting a technology, and those who aren't, where the technology enables them to progress. So I will buy a handcrafted clay plate set for my family that cost me like $80 for 4 friggin' plates, because it's like, this was made by this artist, and don't you love her work? She's so great. She's got a studio in Oakland. Love her work. She's so great. And we talk about the artist, and I pay a premium for that. Most people can't afford $80 for 4 plates. Most people take advantage of the technology, the plastic plate that they can get at Target, where they can get 4 plates for $2, because that's the majority of the world, not even ex the US, right? There was this great website, I don't know if it's still up, called Dollar Street. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but they went out and took photos of what it was like for people and how they live every day, their common use items based on their income and their wealth. How do you cook your food? How do you brush your teeth? How do you store your food? And some people are like using a propane burner to cook their food. And then you go to like an upper class family and they've got like a gas stove in Norway. Like they did this all over the world. And it's really incredible to see. And you realize how much that person that's like living in a hut, doesn't have furniture, sits on the floor, would benefit from having access to the internet on a mobile phone. The mobile phone and the AI could create an unlock for that person like you and I could not imagine. For you and I, we could spend 5 minutes or have an assistant of ours search stuff on the internet for us. But for that individual with nothing, this would be an incredible unlock for them and a benefit for humanity. So what we generally see is this aversion to new technologies, mostly being held by the privileged wealthy class, those who don't need it, and quickly adopted, eagerly adopted by those who will progress because of it. And then there's this weird thing that happens where the wealthy have the luxury of having non-technology assets in their life, having a handmade clay plate. I don't want to I can have someone make a clay plate for me. I can buy organic. I can buy non-GMO and feel good and tell my parents and my family and everyone, we're eating non-GMO tonight, honey. We can do it. Or I'm going to get this handmade painting rather than a $2 poster to decorate my wall. The technology for the printing press and whatever that made the poster for $2 is an incredible unlock, because someone can now put a beautiful poster on their wall. But because I'm wealthy, I can have someone make something by hand with oil. So, or the barista that makes me the special coffee for $8, as opposed to using $2 Folgers instant or 30-cent Folgers instant coffee at home, which the majority of people do. So I think there's like a luxury premium that associates itself with non-technology assets that we will continue to see. And you'll start to observe it in your life. Like there's a lot of stuff that's like D-tech that we're like paying a premium for and we feel good about it. It's authentic, it's genuine, it's more real. And we create this narrative as a luxury class that we can and should buy that and afford it and show it off to each other. But for most people, like progress is enabled by technology. And so they're quickly trying to progress in life. I don't want to be living, I don't want my kids living on the hut floor. I don't want my kids, having the same job I have. I want them to progress. And so we're going to use these technologies to help us do that. And so I think that's really important, particularly in this, like, if you're wealthy, and let me define wealthy. Like, the average per capita income around the world is probably somewhere between $6,000 and $15,000 a year. And a large percentage of the world's population are making less than $6,000 a year. Large percentage. Think about that for a second. So, like, anyone living in America is better off than the best, the top 1% in most of the rest of the world. And so we've created a lot of luxury goods categories that we pay a premium for that disassociates from technology. It's a weird psychological thing, but it's like,
It's utterly fascinating.
Yeah.
So to me, this feels like wealth in and of itself has this sort of self-limiting effect. The wealthier you get, the more likely you are to not have kids. So the more that you're struggling, the more kids you're likely to have. I think
there's another study that shows, to your point, the more wealth you have, the higher your calorie consumption goes, and then you become obese. And then after a certain income threshold, you start to diet and you start losing weight. And then you're on these crazy keto diets, and all the stuff that our friends and cohort like live in is like eat less. I was so funny. I had some friends come over on Sunday, and I was like, you guys want me to grab you a snack? We're gonna have some wine in the backyard. And they're like, wait, you're still eating? Like, it's like the trendy thing is to not eat now. And I think that that's like representative in a lot of the socioeconomic data. You see incomes rise, and then obesity rates climb, diabetes climbs, and then super high net worth people, higher income people, suddenly they get really healthy and they go to the gym and they can afford to do all these things.
So the self-limiting thing is kind of funny, and in the diet space that actually makes sense. But when I think about wealthy countries giving themselves a ceiling that they sort of smash against, and then another country will come behind, to your point about the people that right now they don't have, and they don't want their kids living on the dirt floor of a hut, and so they're going to adopt this stuff, whether GMO foods have a potential downside or not. They're going to take it because it helps them capture wealth. But what I worry about over here on the wealthy side, and I don't mean that you have to have a ton of money. I just mean you're living in a wealthy industrialized nation like America, where now all of a sudden everybody has the luxury of being afraid, of wanting safety over innovation. And so they regulate this to death, and this ends up not moving forward. One of the things that got me thinking about this is what you're doing at Ohalo. I know how bizarre people get about GMO foods. And so using that as a litmus test, how do you think that's going to be embraced in the weird countries, the Western educated, whatever, I forget what the other ones are. But do you think that that's going to get slowed down through regulation, or are people going to adopt that?
Yeah. Do you want me to explain it? So I'll just talk about GMOs for a second. The way plant breeding, which is the process by which we make better plants that grow bigger in our farms, the bigger the plants grow, the more food they make, the lower the cost of food, the more the farmer makes, right? You want to get more stuff grown per acre. It's better for the farmer. They put less in, they get more out, they make more money. It's better for consumers. The price of food goes down. That's the progress of human civilization going back 23,000 years. And plant breeding, historically, we just kind of picked the biggest plant, and then we took the seeds and put those back in the ground, and then we picked the biggest plant next year and we took those seeds and put it back in the ground. We kind of just had these observations, and then we got really good at observing physical characteristics of the plant. I want it to have deeper roots so it's more drought resistant. I want it to grow faster early in the year so that it avoids the frost, the risk of frost. I want it to grow bigger seeds so I can get more food out of it. And so that's called the phenotype, or the physical characteristics of the plant. And plant breeders started to breed for specific phenotypes, picking the plants that had those sort of characteristics and then making new seed out of that. In the 90s, we got DNA sequencers. So then we realized we could actually look at the genes that are making those physical things happen. We saw the gene that makes the seed bigger, the gene that makes the root deeper, the gene that makes the plant grow faster. All of those genes we could see through DNA sequencing. So now we're getting like an insight into what's actually causing those characteristics. So then plant breeders started to breed plants based on the genes that they were seeing, rather than plant the seed, waiting for it to grow and then measuring it. You could just look at the sequence of the DNA from that seed, and then just figure out which seeds you want to plant and which plants you want to cross together. And so this was called molecular breeding, which means using DNA and an understanding of the DNA or the genes of the plant. And then this idea of GMOs came around. And the idea of a GMO or transgenic crop is that you take the DNA or a gene from another species and you stick it in that plant. And now that plant will make a protein that does something new that it doesn't natively do. So one of the original ideas was to put a protein from a bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis in corn. And by doing that, that protein that corn would now make causes rootworm to die when they eat the corn. Rootworm is this worm that kills all the corn plants. It eats them up. And so cornfields get decimated if you don't get rid of the rootworms. And prior to this, farmers were going out and they were spraying fields with insecticides 7 times a year with toxic synthetic chemicals to kill the worms. And by getting the corn to make this protein, this one protein binds to the stomach lining of a worm, doesn't affect humans or any other species. We can measure that, we can see that. So it just affects the worm. The worm won't eat the corn anymore and the yields will go up and you don't have to spray the insecticide anymore. So that was like an amazing, that's called BT corn. It's still, every corn planted in the world today is BT corn that's, got this trait in it. And that's a GMO trait, meaning it's got, the gene came from another species and it was stuck in there. There was another one where they put a gene in rice to make golden rice. So the rice would make vitamin A. So it could help cure river blindness for people in South Asia that aren't getting enough vitamin A. So now when they eat the rice, they're actually getting vitamin A while they eat it. And that gene isn't native to rice. You have to put that gene in there to get the rice to make vitamin A. But again, people got worried about messing with nature, messing with genes. But humans have been breeding plants. We've been relating to nature, taking winners out and throwing away losers since 23,000 years ago. So breeding has been a big part of what we've done as a species. And this idea that humans are just going to sit around and wait for stuff to fall off a tree or wait for animals to die and then we'll eat their carcass, that is the true natural state of things. Any aspect of farming is humans intervening and engineering our planet and getting involved in making the things we want to make. So GMOs got this bad rap. They went really south. People hate them. They're highly regulated all over the world. And the consumer mindset is these are bad. They're doing things that we don't understand. They're doing things that are bad for the planet. There's all these other rationalizations for why they're bad. And we can break each of them down, but we don't need to go through all. We can talk about all the claims that have been made, but I've tried to explain generally what they are. And we can measure what they do. We can measure the protein that they're making. We can measure whether it's good or not for the plant and for people and for the planet and species and so on. Gene editing came around. And what gene editing is it's not about taking DNA from a foreign species and sticking it in a plant. You basically apply a protein to the cell of a plant. And when you apply that protein, it causes a change in 1 or 2 or a couple of letters in a gene in that plant. So you're not introducing foreign DNA. There's no foreign DNA inserted. You're not creating, non-native genes. What you're doing is you're basically telling the plant, I want to create this gene that the plant already makes. You want to make a slight change so that rather than make breeding cycles for hundreds of years to try and get that change to happen in that gene, you can specifically target that change and make it happen instantly. And it created this unlock. It creates this unlock for cancer therapeutics, creates this unlock for treating human disease, and it creates this unlock for making those physical traits happen in plants that we would otherwise have to spend thousands of years breeding the plants to get to happen. And we can have it happen instantly. These are traits that already exist in the plant. These are genes that already exist in the plant, and you're basically turning them on or off or making a slight change to them that would otherwise happen naturally. So gene editing is being treated in a very different way than GMOs. The regulatory environment on it is very different in the US. You can file a form, say there's a gene edited plant. The government says we've signed off on it. There's no new DNA introduced. You can go to market with it. It takes a couple of weeks. Whereas GMOs, it's like many, many years. All these agencies have to get involved. There's a lot of approvals. So gene editing has allowed all of these new programs to launch that are allowing plant breeders to create better, healthier, bigger plants that have better consumer traits, more nutrition, using the DNA that's already in the plants. You're not changing anything. You're not bringing in outside DNA. You're basically just turning traits on or off that are already in that plant. You just don't have to try and do it randomly through breeding. So that's the magic of that basic technology. And so it's being looked at differently, but there's still always the risk of consumers coming along and consumer groups saying, we're messing with nature again. And again, you got to go back 23,000 years to see humans have been breeding plants, messing with nature for 23,000 years. When we first started breeding corn, it was a little grass. It was this big and it had some seeds at the top of the grass. And now corn is 12 feet high and the corn cob is this big. And so breeding over 9,000 years created modern corn. And the original natural corn was just a grass that was that big. And that's the fourth largest source of calories on earth today, is that corn plant. So this has become, and it's the way we feed animals for animal agriculture, which, you know, we could talk about another time. But that whole system, I think, is where, you know, people don't really have the full context of this. And when you hear a soundbite that's pretty negative on, you know, you want to believe it. You're like, it feels good to be against the technology. It feels good to be against Monsanto, be against the man, be against the big system. And that goes back to my point earlier about it's easy to fall into the dark ages trap where we say, let's stymie this technology because, you know, there's a lot of reasons why people are able to kind of cast it in a negative light without actually having that context of the benefits. And it's really sad, like golden rice never took off. It was like an incredible product. They make vitamin A for 1 billion people in their rice source, but people were nervous about, we don't understand, because people don't understand genetics, they don't understand DNA sequencing, they don't understand how the system works, they don't understand how it does this. It's scary, you know? And similarly, AI, which is basically just a statistical process on a matrix of numbers, is similarly scary. Like when you break these technologies down, I think it's important to do this sort of work where we talk it a long way about.
Do you have any dystopian fears about AI?
Yeah, I was in Vegas and I was a little hungover and I was kind of like sitting there in a cafe a couple months ago, like a year ago. And I saw like some kid had a drone and I was looking at all the people around me and I was kind of in this like weird state. And I was like, man, like, what if that drone just like AI'd, like just shot everyone? Like it was this random thought I had. And it was like, why did I think that? That's crazy. A couple weeks ago, China put out this video of this military dog.
Whoa,
have you seen this thing?
The swarms?
Isn't that crazy?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I look at that military dog and I'm like, dude, they put a machine gun on the back of the military dog and it's got the AI vision. It can run autonomously. It can run disconnected from the network. So it can run on its own, compute at the edge. It's got its own computer on it. And you could see China making 10 million, 100 million of these, and then they just go out in the field and their job is just to wipe out people. Dude, that is dystopian.
It is a literal Black Mirror episode.
So there is dystopian fear, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. I very much want to see people adopt these technologies. I am for sure a techno optimist and find myself extremely compelled. I won't be an early adopter of things like augmenting my own body, but when I really think about where this all goes, I'm far more compelled by the technology than I am fearful of the downside. However, humans, if we got as scared as we got over COVID, which had less than 2%, I don't think anybody argues that, death rate, like I just don't see people continuing to do good calculus in terms of, okay, what are the long-term advantages of this? So, but you did say something that gives me hope, which is that there are people that are struggling that they'll adopt it out of necessity. Like they couldn't in good conscience not bring it to their country because their country's struggling. So it becomes does this become an interesting tale of leapfrogging where countries are adopting some of the stuff, even though other people might be afraid of it? And I'll put one on the table. I'll be very interested to see how the community reacts to this, but cellular meat, which I think is really interesting, but I think it's going to get massive pushback. So I think cellular meat will probably get more pushback than GMOs ever did. Can you tell people what cellular meat is? And do you think I'm out of my mind with that?
You're 100% right. It's been banned in Florida
already.
And there's 7 other states that the state legislatures are looking at bills to ban it. And there is now talk in the US Senate of putting together a bill to ban it. So to make a calorie of beef takes 30 calories of energy from the rest of the food system to feed the cow, to make the corn, the water, all the stuff that goes into growing the cow, processing the cow, transporting it, etc. There's an incredible amount of energy to make 1 pound of beef. And that's the way the system works today. So the question is, scientifically, that people have been asking is, can we take the cell from the cow that makes the cow's muscle, the muscle tissue, and then can we get it to just grow the muscle in a vat, in a giant, what they call bioreactor, like you make beer, like a brewery, like a fermentation tank.
Interesting.
So you pour sugar in, you pour energy in, and you get those cells, you make some of those changes to the cell to get it to suck up the sugar water and double and double and double and grow muscles. And that's a simple way of describing it. You also have to put proteins into the vat to trigger those cells to grow, to make them think that they're supposed to be growing. You're trying to make sure that there's no disease in there, that there's no bacteria that enters. There's all these steps in trying to make this work. So theoretically, we have all the tools we need to grow the muscle from the cow without the cow and use less energy, use less carbon, lower footprint, and theoretically, as it scales up, lower cost. So instead of paying $6 for a pound of ground beef, you pay $3 for a pound of ground beef if these systems work right. Because all you're doing is putting a cell in there and then feeding it sugar and some sort of nitrogen source, because nitrogen is needed to make protein. So that's the concept. And people have been talking about this for 20 years and they've been working on it. And there's now dozens of startups working on this. And some of them are making fish, chicken, eggs, milk, cheese, cows, goats. There's one that's doing foie gras. There's one that's doing Japanese eel. I mean, there's all these companies that are focused on these different animal products, and they're all taking different cell lines and iterating on the manufacturing process to try and make the same thing you would otherwise get from the animal, except made in a bioreactor in a tank. And it's the same cells, it's the same protein, it's the same everything else that you would otherwise be consuming. So the FDA started approving these. They started reviewing them and they're like, okay, we got it. We've analyzed it. We've studied it. There's millions of dollars that have gone into regulatory review on these things. They started approving a couple of them. Each one of them has to go through regulatory approval in the US. And as they started getting approved, cattle ranchers started saying, this is messed up and you're going to destroy our industry. You know, cattle ranching, just so you know, there's about 100 billion acres on Earth. 70 billion acres are water. 30 billion acres are land. Of that 30 billion acres, 15 billion are where we grow stuff. 3 billion is crops, 12 billion is animals. So we have like a lot of ranch land, a lot of pasture land on Earth where we have animals grazing. So this is a big industry in the US too. We have a lot of ranches in the US. A lot of people make a lot of money growing cows in rangeland, in ranch land. And so there's a big industry, a big lobby that would be threatened by this new technology. So they showed up to Governor DeSantis' signing ceremony, like the ranching industry, and they were all happy. And he was like, we're protecting the ranchers, we're saving the industry. And they stymied the adoption of this, you know, what people call lab-grown meat, but, you know, it's basically grown in a fermenter tank, meat that you could otherwise buy elsewhere because the FDA has approved it. It's legal, it's been regulated, it's been tested, all this stuff. And DeSantis like basically stood up and said, we're doing regulatory capture, you know, forget the tech companies, forget the fact that it could save people money because now meat can be cheaper. Consumers can have a choice. They don't have to buy this stuff. If they think it's junk, they think it's disgusting, they think it's evil, they don't have to buy it. They could still buy beef. So why stymie the innovation? Well, because the ranchers are there and they're saying we got to protect our industry. So this is classic regulatory capture, classic cronyism. And so it's enabled by a fear of the technology. It's enabled by the fact that they're editing cells and putting them in vats and lab-grown meat, and we don't want that putrid stuff growing in our. And DeSantis put out like a picture of like one of the tanks that grows the meat, and then he's like, "Look at how they're growing this. It's disgusting." And then someone else put out a picture of the exact same tank, which is making beer that we all drink, or like making cheese, or making yogurt, or like all the other stuff that we eat. It's the same tank. Anyway, so that's what's going on right now, and it is. You're exactly right. It is sweeping the nation. There is a fear and a concern about the technology that allows and enables the regulatory capture and the lack of innovation and progress. And if we could make the cost of food 50% cheaper by allowing this technology to proliferate, and it worked, and people liked it, and they were willing to buy it, then the market will work. And if the product sucks and it doesn't taste good, or it's more unhealthy for you, or all the other things that are bad, consumers will not buy it and they'll stick with beef. But now they're stopping the market from even being able to discover itself. And so regulatory capture is underway in this system that feels really unfortunate to me. And everyone in tech, even I'm a vegetarian, so like I'm not going to buy any of this stuff anyway, so I don't care. From a consumer perspective,
You wouldn't eat it even if it was.
I have no interest. I have no desire. Because it doesn't appeal to me. I don't know. It's like
Steak is tasty, Dave.
Yeah, I've never had it.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Just crazy. The first time I heard you say that, I was like, I must have misheard that.
Yeah, I was raised vegetarian, so it's weird. And so I don't know, but maybe I'll try it for sure. But it's not like something I desire, right?
Right.
Like, but I could see a lot of people saying, I just like beef. Why mess with it? So it's okay to let this regulatory capture. But as soon as you let that happen, it's like freedom of speech. As soon as you let it happen, you allow it to happen everywhere that people can do regulatory capture. But you should let the market figure it out. Let consumers try it. Let people see if it's good. Let people see if they can. These guys can't even make this stuff cheap enough today. It's like $100 versus $3. they got to get this thing super cheap before it even works. So we got to like let this thing get tested. Anyway, so that's a sort of example of where stuff can get shut off. Then California passed an AI bill to regulate AI. There's like 26 billion flops. I don't know how they define this thing on like the models need to be approved and reported. So if you write software that's over a certain size, you have to report to the government now. So we see a lot of this sort of, to your point, kind of pop-ups of like concern. Are we really like preventing the progress and the innovation that will help address the economic issue and benefit people? I mean, imagine all the people that can't afford to eat beef every day. I mean, remember like in China, there's 1 billion people living on less than $6,000 a year. And now they're making $30,000 a year. It's incredible.
Wow.
In 30 years, they've had that transformation. And they used to eat meat 1 meal a week on average. Now they eat meat 5 meals a week. So there's a luxury that has, kind of arisen. But think about all the people that can access that meat, that if you can make a lower cost meat and because you don't need to grow the animal and grow all the feed and use all the land, everything, the cost can come down because you're growing it in a fermenter tank. There might be a pretty good market for this. It could help a lot of people get access to stuff that they want and progress. So again, it's great for the rich people in America and the Floridians that want to support the ranching industry, but these businesses are mostly going to benefit other people, like other technologies do.
Well, we now at least have a way to get out of some of the regulatory capture. We have a way to avoid some of the censorship and malinformation, misinformation, all that stuff. Let the market decide, as you said, with independent media podcasting, which you are a part of with the All In podcast. Yeah. And so I do have to know, there was one point, so I'm an avid listener of the All In podcast, but there was a point where you and Jason, it seemed like, had so much beef that you guys actually considered ending the podcast.
Are you talking about this morning?
Oh no, did more kick off? What is happening, David Friedberg?
It's endless. It's endless.
What's the beef between the two of you?
Like I kind of never was like trying to be on a podcast. So this was not like something I set out to do. My friends were trying to do a podcast, Jason and Chamath, and then they invited me to talk about COVID at the beginning. And I said, sure, I'll talk about it on your new podcast on YouTube or whatever. And then it became like the four of us with Sachs joining. And there have every week for years, I've questioned, should I keep doing this for various reasons? Because it's not motivational for me to like go put myself out there and do this sort of thing. So that wasn't something I wanted to do. And then when I run into conflict or disagreement on how we should do things, or let's just make sure we're doing the right thing by my standards or by my point of view, which might be just a different point of view, I get frustrated and I'm like, this is not worth it for me, because I never really wanted to do it. So it's easy for me to kind of say, let's get out of here. But yeah, I mean, look, Jason's obviously one of my besties, one of my good friends, and we butt heads a lot. I really care deeply about some things that he wants to be involved in, and that's caused a lot of conflict on various things like our summit and our show and so on. But we kept at it. I get a lot of benefit when I hear people on the street say that I said something that inspired a change in their life. And when I hear that, it makes me say, okay, it's worth it. It's worth doing it. Like, I really believe that, to your point earlier, people have this ability to control their own destiny, and they have to put the effort out, and they can change their lives. And there's people have to build equity in themselves, was the comment I had made on this one show, which means make sure that everything you're doing is increasing your leverage next year. You get more for less next year, which means you can do more and progress your life, versus just being in a service business or doing a service where you do the same thing over and over again, but there's no progression, there's no equity, there's no new skills, there's no new training, there's no leverage, there's no value that's being created as you do that. And it's a really important point that I think people need to take into account in thinking about their careers and their career decisions. And I had made this comment offhand at one of the shows, and there was this guy who I saw who had told me it changed his life, and he went out and did a like real estate class and started kind of changing like what he was doing. And I said, that's the reason I do the show.
No, people are in the grips of ideas. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
Now, you guys have started playing around in politics. Do you worry about that at all?
Yeah, I don't like the politics, because you've heard my point of view today. I feel like it's a false choice. Like, when I look at the candidates for president, for example, it's a false choice. Like, I'm not sure I hear either person saying the thing that I think I need to hear, which is we got 33 trillion of debt and we're running a $3 trillion annual deficit. What are we going to do? That's the number one thing we have to figure out before we talk about all the 50 other things that everyone cares about, because otherwise there is no ability to do all the other things. So for me, and then I think like so much of the machinations are just like so boring. Like it's just gossipy. It's like, ugh. Like I don't care about so and so. Yeah, they all have good sons. They all have bad sons. They all go into prison. I get it. Like, you know, like it's like one guy's the whole thing. It's not as interesting to me. I care much more about like the bigger picture stuff. And so when we get into the details on who said what at what trial, it's like I kind of tune out. But you are right. I get a lot of calls and a lot of emails from friends being like, you're associating yourself with Trump supporters now? What is wrong with you? This kind of blanket association problem where people are like, oh, you're friends with that person. They're throwing a fundraiser for Trump. Why are you still on that show? Why are you platforming Trump? And my friends are my friends. Like they're interested in politics. They're giving money to this guy. They also gave money to Democrats. They also gave money to other candidates in the Republican Party. Like I'm not judging them. I don't care what they do with their time. If they want to talk about it, we'll talk about it. I won't have much to say because I don't think there's much insight I can provide or much analysis I can do. So that's it. But I do get a lot of this, like, and it actually makes me say to people, like, why do you care who I'm friends with? Like, you know, have I expressed something that you disagree with? If I've expressed something you disagree with, we should talk about what I said that you disagree with. But you shouldn't immediately associate my opinions with the actions that a friend of mine took. Pretty messed up. And it shows me a lot about how people think now. Like, I'm only going to hang out with people that think like me or talk like me. I don't have any interest in engaging in discourse with people that think differently than me. And I think that's wrong. I think we got to be like fully engaged and fully conversational with all aspects of the discourse on these matters that are important.
Agreed. And apparently they don't want you to associate with people that think differently than you do. So even once removed, people have a beef, which is pretty crazy. Do you guys think part of the magic of the show is that you don't always agree?
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely heard that. That like a lot of people say in comments and stuff, we get comments like, it's great to see people have civil discourse where we don't go to the attack of the other person. Sometimes we might make that mistake because it's human nature. But like if you think about media, the feedback loop is say something controversial and activating. Like the consumer, the viewer is activated. I said something like, screw you, Joe Biden's dying. Look at him, he's a dead corpse, Weekend at Bernie's. I attacked the guy. That's activating to someone that agrees with me. So then they tune in more and then the viewership goes up. And so then you say that again, you say more stuff. And so media has this like interesting evolutionary curve where the feedback loop that drives the limbic system response in the viewer, you know, ends up dominating the media. I mean, Rupert Murdoch learned this early on, where he had that gossip trade rag in London, you know, and it was normally, I think it was originally like just general news, and then he started doing more of the celebrity gossip, and then he sold more, and people like activated by it. They're like, oh, this is so titillating. I'm so into it. And then he sold a ton, and then he just kept doing more of it. And so there is this aspect, I think, that we need to kind of be cognizant of, that you allow the discourse to happen where you don't just attack the other person or attack the target, and you dialogue about the facts. This goes back to my point about like enlightenment, like what is the empiricism? What does the data show us? What's the analysis we can do on that data? As opposed to the ignore the data, talk bad about the person, get everyone excited, and now we all agree that person's bad. But we didn't actually talk about any of the data. So like, I'm a big believer, like we should be talking about the facts of the matter and like debating around that, both sides. Like both sides should spend an hour on a debate stage talking about how we're going to resolve this fiscal deficit and debt problem. And if you don't think it's a problem, then tell us why, articulate why.
How do you think through a problem? So obviously you're starting with facts, but like, how do you build up? Are you building up towards a moral conclusion? How do you think about that?
I don't know how to I mean, I'm a first principles thinker, so I try to be.
And when you say that, do you mean you start literally at physics?
So if someone says like we recently had this thing at my company, we're trying to build a greenhouse or build a lab building next to our greenhouse. And we got to get all this stuff done, and we got 6 weeks to do it. And everyone's like, well, the GC says it takes 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. And I'm like, well, why? You got to always ask why. And then when you get their assumptions, like the assumption is the GC knows, like they're the source of truth. Turns out the general contractor is not the source of truth. General contractor does things their way. So when you get into it, it's like, well, they work 6-hour shifts. They work 5 days a week. I'm like, well, let's pay someone to work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. Okay, well, now it works because the source of truth was not that general contractor. We need a generator. The electrical guy says it costs 180 grand. I'm giving you exact examples of stuff that's happened. My team's going to kill me for this. But I was like, why do we need, I just went on the website and I found a Home Depot generator for 8 grand. Why am I spending $100 some odd thousand? Like, because the electrical guy said it, that's how it costs. I'm like, well, you guys know what the amperage is. You know, like we need a 3-phase generator. Here's one that'll be delivered in 10 days. We don't need the electrical. Well, why does he say that? Well, he gives a service guarantee. I was like, well, do we need that? Let's ask that question. Well, it turns out we could save $100 some odd thousand. And if we need the service, it'll cost us a lot less than 100 grand. Okay, yeah, we should probably switch to that. And so I'm just giving you some examples of always asking why and getting to the source of truth. A lot of people talk about Elon's definition of like first principles, which is physics, because physics are the fundamental source of truth. Like you eventually go all the way back there. But when you ask people why enough times, you end up getting to the ground fact, the ground truth that you can then build from to make the right decision or come up with the right solution for a problem. So that's often how I like to think about these things. You know, people have a shorthand, for example, like we need to run plant breeding cycles for one of our crops. And they're like, well, it'll take 3 years before we'll be commercial. And I'm like, you're just using the approximation because that's the way everyone in the industry does it. They take 3 years to do it. Let's figure out what they're doing and what we could do differently to get it done as fast as possible. Okay, we can get it done in 12 months. When you break the problem down to every step in the process that's needed, rather than use the shorthand approximation that the way other people do it is the source of truth, and we say, let's figure out what are the steps, we can come up with a new way of doing things with shortened timelines, 24-hour cycles, et cetera, et cetera. Suddenly we can get it done in a third of the time. So for me, first principles thinking is all about asking why and getting to the source of truth. What are the absolute facts, the data that you know is true, and then building the answer or the solution from there.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. I tell people that one, you're trying to map base assumptions. So there's some base assumption that's driving that. You need this generator. And of course, you're going to want the service contract. So they just pencil it in. But to your point, when you actually understand how things work, and if you can get to the essence of the thing, that becomes really important.
That's right.
So that's why I tell people, look, you're not going to spend your time actually thinking up from physics, but that really is the game that you're playing. And so if you ask, can this be done in 6 weeks? If it doesn't violate the laws of physics, it is possible. Now, you may not have the skills, the talent, or the desire to do the things that you would need to do in order to get it done, but at least you'll know what the real problem is. Oh, the real problem is we're up against the generator, or we're up against that contractor's not available for a month or whatever. And so, okay, now I actually know the problem set. And once I know the real problem set, then I can solve the problem.
Yeah.
But so often people they're reactive to the thing that they're given instead of understanding its nature and then figuring out where we go. All right. I want to know the besties ranked in order of poker ability. What do you got for me?
Sachs doesn't play very much. I got to be honest. He's been like pretty absent from our poker game. And Chamov's game has changed a lot in the last year and a half. He's been changing up his game.
For better or worse?
I think he's just grinding out more. Like he's more like careful and consistent. He was very like over the top, aggressive, kept pushing the envelope back in the day. Like I told him this. I said his game's changed a lot, but he's also been training he's been practicing and doing work on his game. I know that he shared that. So he's doing well. And JCal is kind of like a little nit. Like, you know, nit means that he sits around and waits for the right thing, and then he takes it and he doesn't bet anymore. He kind of just goes home with his money. I give him shit about that, so you can give me credit for that. And I'm probably not too dissimilar. I don't play enough, I think, this year. I haven't played very much this year. So I'm not giving you a great answer. Everyone's different. Sachs is just MIA, so I wouldn't even rank him anymore. I don't even know the last time he played. He's too busy electing the next U.S. president. So, yeah, I mean, if I were... one of the problems with the game also is there's a lot of like randomness that comes into our game with our other players. So we get the game changes a lot depending on who's in the game. Sometimes we get these crazy aggressive players who are friends of ours who just don't care about how much they're winning or losing, and they'll go as aggressive over the top as they can. Sometimes it's a smaller game, a little more careful and strategic. People are tired, so the game style matters. Some of us perform better in different game styles. Like Chamath does well in the big games. I don't play the big over the top games. Like Chamath knows how to play those games better than I do. And I'm much better in the more like normalized, like strategic, like where you can do a better job game theorying, like where people are at, like theorizing where people are at. So.
All right. The political answer,
yes,
Mr. Friedberg.
Yes.
All right. Where can people follow you? This has been incredible.
I don't post much. I have a Twitter account, a Twitter handle, Friedberg. That's it. Yeah.
And the All In Podcast.
And I'm on the All In Podcast.
Where podcasts are found, everybody.
Click subscribe and click the notifications button. I've learned to say that.
That's good. When you get to smash the subscribe button, then I'll know you've really made it.
I think we said we're going to do a party. I don't know if we've announced where yet, but it'll be in Vegas. So we're going to do a party in Vegas when we get to 1 million subs, which was never a goal for us, but we realized recently we should probably set that goal. And
100%. The people that follow your show will love it.
Yeah. So we're going to do a big party. It'll be fun.
I like it. I look forward to it. All right, everybody. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace.
Thank you.
If you like this conversation, check out this episode to learn more. So we've gotten over our skis on debt. The Fed is going to try to print their way out of this. All that does is create inflation. They try to break the back of inflation with high interest rates, but so many people got themselves into debt in